What I think parents should know about home visiting is that you can learn a lot of new things and tips and tricks, how to take care of the baby and what to do, and if you're, stuck in a routine and everything being monotonous, like they give you new resources and new tools how to handle parenthood.
It was nice to have them kind of guiding me. Even though I was not a first-time mom, I felt like a first-time mom.
It totally blew my mind over time. So much information that I had no idea about. She was straightforward when, teaching me this stuff and answered any of my questions. Just a really positive experience.
What I think that parents could benefit with the program is just having someone here for you, especially for first-time parents. It can be very isolating and it can be very lonely, and having the home visitor changes that, and it feels very good.
For me, having a home visitor is like having a second mom there.
A lot has changed. I'm definitely more knowledgeable taking care of her, and I know that anytime I need advice or help from somebody, I can just call her.
It's just that little positive nudge to, hey, I'm noticing something, let's find a way how to change it. And she's like, you know what, Amanda, let's pick you up, dust you off, and let's go over to, see about either getting your driver's license or seeing about, going to college, see if we can start something for you.
It's totally worth it. Like, even if you're on the fence at first, you don't feel like having a stranger coming in your house and teaching you about your little one, do it anyway. You get the help that you need. You get professional advice on things you may not know about your child. And the fact that the program has no fees or anything, it's all totally free, is fantastic.
Yo creo que si conozco a alguien que está próxima a ser mamá, lo primero que haría sería recomendarle el programa, porque te entrega mucho apoyo, mucha información y más que nada como apoyo emocional, una guía, te da una visión diferente de cómo es ser papá aquí, quizás en este país.
Y así pues es un bonito programa, porque pues es buena persona la señora y los ha atendido muy bien.
Pensé que nada más iba a ser un programa de orientación quizás para los nuevos padres, pero creo que nos llevamos una linda sorpresa porque Gaby es una persona muy cercana a nosotros, es como parte de nuestra familia, siempre ha estado dispuesta a ayudarnos y a escucharnos con nuestras dudas sobre la paternidad, y en nuestro caso, que estamos solos en este país, ha sido como de mucha ayuda.
Es un gran apoyo para nuevos padres, y más aún si están en nuestra situación, que somos extranjeros, que nuestra familia y amigos, como dice Carla, están en otro país, lejos. Entonces sí, viene muy bien el programa para apoyarse tanto emocional y como anímicamente, y bueno, en varios aspectos del programa que nos ayuda a seguir adelante con esta nueva aventura.
Te ayuda como a ver los distintos recursos que tiene la comunidad para nuevos papás, entonces creo que es de gran ayuda.
No queda mucho que agregar, pero lo veo de la misma forma.
Que hemos aprendido algunas cosas aquí y pues los han ayudado, como este programa los ha ayudado para seguir creciendo a la bebé, como con buenos consejos y así.
Sí, y creo que también ha sido muy importante el tema de apoyarnos con el libro y saber qué actividades hacer con Máximo de acuerdo a su edad, cómo estimularlo, cómo cuidarlo de los peligros de la casa, como cosas que uno como papá nuevo no conoce, claro.
Pues a mí me gustaría que lo siguiéramos visitando aquí en la biblioteca de Covelo. Está tranquilo y muy bonito aquí.
Cuando no nos podemos reunir, nos comunicamos por Zoom o
Welcome to
una
the
llamada
July 25th,
telefónica.
24 meeting of the Mendocino County Planning Commission. This is a special meeting. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting. I'm going to call to order today's meeting of the Planning Commission. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting with participants both in person and digitally. The public may participate digitally in meetings by sending comments to pbscommissions@mendocinocounty.gov or orally via telecomment in lieu of personal attendance. All public comment will be made available to the commissioners, staff, and the general public after processing by staff, and can be viewed as attachments to this meeting agenda on the Planning Commission agenda page. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Rabini,
Here.
Commissioner Jones, Commissioner Purnell,
Here.
Commissioner Wiedemann,
Here.
Chair Pollen.
Here. Thank you. Do we have determination of legal notice?
Legal notice has been determined on this matter on the agenda.
Very much. Director's report. Have anything?
No director's report today.
All right, thank you very much. All right, item number 4 is matters from the public. This is public expression. Members from the public are welcome to address the Planning Commission on items not listed on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is prohibited by law from taking action on matters not on the agenda. Individuals wishing to address the Planning Commission under matters from the public may do so in person, via email, or Zoom. If there are any members of the public logged into the Zoom meeting who wish to speak under public expression, please use the raise hand feature to allow staff to add you to the meeting. Do we have any requests for telecomment under public expression?
I did not receive anything, but there was correspondence and it was posted to the website.
Fantastic, thank you. Are there any members on Zoom who have a hand raised?
No members on Zoom with a raised hand.
Wonderful. Any members of the public in attendance who'd like to speak? All right, seeing none, I will close the public expression. Item number 5 is consent calendar. This is approval of the Planning Commission meeting minutes of July 3rd, 2024. There are no revisions. I'll accept a motion. Approve the consent calendar.
I move to approve.
Second.
Commissioner Rabini,
Yes.
Commissioner Purnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Jones,
Yes.
Commissioner Wiedemann,
Yes.
and Chair Pollen.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right. Moving on, item number 6A of the regular calendar. This is case number OA_2023-0001. Review and consider a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors on proposed adoption of amendments to Division 1 of Title 20 of Mendocino County Code. I'll open this to the public hearing now. Have there been any correspondence or telephone calls received on this matter?
All items have been posted to the website.
All right, thank you very much. All right, staff, would you like to do a presentation?
Yes, thank
Great.
you.
Thank you very much.
Julia Krog, Planning and Building Services Director. So first, I'm going to walk through the staff memorandum that was prepared for this meeting, which is posted on the website, and including the supplemental memo that was added yesterday evening just regarding the airport land use consistency and lack of need for review by them, which was sent to the commissioners as well. Then I'll pause after that and likely look to the chair and the fellow commissioners to see how you want to start walking through the actual text of the regulations. So I'll start with my overview here. So the current zoning ordinance, Division 1 of Title 20, was adopted in 1987, and it regulates development within the inland areas of the county, so exclusive of the coastal zone. With the exception of some very minor updates that have happened over time, Division 1 largely remains the same from when it was originally adopted in 1987. In 2020, the county applied for the Local Early Action Planning Grant, which was the LEAP grant through the California Department of Housing and Community Development. And this was for the purpose of updating Division 1 of County Code, and then also to include rezonings to implement the Ukiah Valley Area Plan. This was awarded by HCD on October 6th, and we received $150,000. As you know, we then issued a request for proposals and ultimately awarded a contract to initiate the work on the zoning code update. The scope under the LEAP grant was revised shortly after the RFP was completed to remove the portion regarding the Ukiah Valley Area Plan rezonings, and that was primarily because the anticipated expense with just doing the zoning code update was going to utilize that entire $150,000 plus a local county match. So the LEAP grant requires the adoption by the county of an updated code by September 30th, 2024. And so as you can see, that's a rather compressed timeline. It's taken us a while to get to this point, but we're excited to be in front of you today to talk through this update, and then we will be, after the Planning Commission provides its report and recommendation, proceeding to the Board of Supervisors. So now I'm going to dive into the chapters that we did not touch as part of this. So there's a list provided within the staff memorandum on page 1, and I'll just briefly touch on those. There was no change to industrial or agricultural use types. There was no change to the cannabis accommodation or commercial cannabis prohibition combining districts. No changes to special minimum lot size or the plan combining districts. No change to seismic study combining districts and community character combining district. There was no change to home occupations or development review, which is related to industrial development. Development review process for Brook Trails Township, request for reasonable accommodations under the Fair Housing Acts, or development review within the Brush Street Triangle area, and the appendices A, B, and C remain the same. There are several chapters which are proposed for repeal. The first that I'll talk about is the Airport Height Combining District. So this combining district was added on properties that were near airports where the height of structures may have needed to be limited due to safety reasons. This combining district was applied to properties before the county adopted the Airport Comprehensive Land Use Plan in 1993. And as part of adopting the Airport Comprehensive Land Use Plan, we added also the AZ, an Airport Zone Combining District. So it seems at that time that perhaps this Airport Height Combining District should have been removed when we did adopt the Airport Zone Combining District as well, because the airport zone and the requirements of both the Airport Comprehensive Land Use Plan and the Ukiah Municipal Land Use Compatibility Plan require that there is compliance with height restrictions within each one of those plans. So it is not necessary to have a separate combining district adding additional height restrictions or even potentially conflicting height restrictions. So as part of this, there are a few properties that we would be coming back through the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors to rezone to remove that AH combining district from those properties. So we really see this as a cleanup and support the repeal of it because the properties that are currently covered by this would be addressed through the AZ Airport Zone Combining District, which is going to remain with a few modifications to it. Similarly, the Airport District, AV Combining District, is proposed to be repealed, and this district was intended to be applied to properties either used or planned to be used for airports. Interestingly enough, there are actually no properties currently zoned AV within the county, despite the fact that we do have airports. So again, this was added at a time before we had the Comprehensive Land Use Plan adopted in 1993 or the Ukiah Municipal Land Use Compatibility Plan. Again, the AZ Airport Zone Combining District would address any regulations that would affect airport properties or properties within the airport influence area. So we see this again as a cleanup item to remove the AV district, does not affect the zoning of any property, doesn't change allowable uses. Everything still must comply with the applicable land use compatibility plan. The next chapter that we are proposing for repeal is the Special Hazards Combining District chapter. Similarly, there are no properties in our county that are zoned with a Special Hazards Combining District. So we see this also as a cleanup. It looks like it was really intended to be added to properties that had some potential hazards from steep or unstable slopes or potential for cliff erosion or other potential ground failure. And Areas with any sort of geologic risk, such as fault zones, are covered already underneath our seismic study combining district, and those properties are all properly zoned. And then any other potential hazards, such as those associated with steep slopes or unstable slopes or cliff erosion or ground failure, those are handled through building code requirements at the time that any development is coming forward on a property. So this does not seem like it is a necessary combining district to continue to have within the code. That's why we do recommend its repeal. The next chapter, 20.148, had supplemental limitations on uses. And this chapter was intended to be designated, it listed limitations that were intended to be designated with a number inside quotations on applicable use types in the preceding chapters. And the preceding chapters are those that describe use types, your commercial, residential, civic, industrial use types. However, it does not appear that they were actually applied when Division 1 was adopted in 1987. So limitations included under this chapter, we've either merged with existing use type descriptions or deleted, due to either being inconsistent with state law, as it relates to some of the farm labor housing or agricultural employee housing, and then also because some of them were never applied previously. We could not tie them to what use type they were intended to be applied to. So again, another cleanup to be done here, and we don't foresee any potential challenges with deletion of those items within there, and did confer with some past staff as well to try to be able to connect the dots, and were unable to do so. So next we'll talk about the extension of time for qualifying clean slate or Blur 2 applicants, and this is really a cleanup that I think just it's already repealed as of its own provisions within the code, so just actually formally repealing it. This chapter was repealed as of August 1st, 1991, but was never formally removed from the code. The general plan and zoning ordinance compatibility in 20.220, we have proposed to merge this into chapter 20.040, establishment of zoning districts. So the intent, the compatibility chart is still provided within county code. We're just proposing to consolidate it into a separate chapter that already exists. Chapter 20.224, which is the interim urgency ordinance prohibiting new or expanded industrial uses on Pinoleville Rancheria. This urgency ordinance also expired May 23rd, 1990, and since it's no longer effective, we recommend repeal. That is similar to the next urgency ordinance and section described there, 20.228, which is for prohibiting subdivision of land within the North Fort Bragg Pudding Creek Planned Development Area. This urgency ordinance also expired February 12th, 1991, and since it's no longer effective, it makes sense to repeal it. And then finally, the last chapter is chapter 20.238, inclusionary housing. So the inclusionary housing ordinance is intended to increase the amount of affordable housing supply in the county, and it applies to any residential development applied at subdivision or 2 or more units, with exceptions such as efficiency units of 650 square feet or less. And developers can comply with the ordinance by either reserving a certain percentage of their housing units for affordable housing or by paying in lieu fees. And chapter 20.238 includes those different percentages or fee amounts based upon the amount of the housing development that's proposed. This chapter in its current form is proposed to be repealed, and a separate chapter, 20.234, is proposed for adoption. The proposed chapter 20.234 will move the county to a voluntary program where the county will encourage developers to utilize state density bonus law provided in government code, should they wish to receive concessions or incentives for a project. So if you all remember the Bella Vista project that came through the Planning Commission, they utilize state density bonus law, and as part of that, they are entitled to concessions or incentives. So items such as allowance for double frontage lots where those may not previously be allowed, or reduce setbacks, things like that. So if a development came forward and wanted to seek to have concessions or incentives, they would need to comply with state density bonus law in order to receive those. The replacement chapter, 20.234, will also retain a section regarding the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to ensure that the monies received under that fund are utilized for their intended purpose. and can also serve as a fund for any equity share funds received pursuant to density bonus provisions. Chapter 20.238, the inclusionary housing ordinance, was identified as an impediment to housing production in our most recent housing element, the 2019 to 2027 housing element. And as is noted in the housing element and also during a Board of Supervisors meeting held in June of 2023, where direction was provided to repeal this chapter as well, developers have expressed concern that it makes new development unprofitable to complete and is one of the factors that deters them from bringing any large-scale housing projects to the county. The housing element did include an action item that stated the county would amend the inclusionary housing requirements to allow more flexibility, encouraging greater use of the program. In reviewing the effectiveness of this existing chapter, staff does believe that it is harming overall housing production more than it is providing any assistance to affordable housing production, and recommends repeal instead of amendment of the chapter. As I noted, the only major subdivisions processed in the last 15 years since this ordinance was adopted was actually a subdivision and then a re-subdivision of the same property, which is the Bella Vista project, and they chose to utilize an exemption to comply with state density bonus law rather than utilizing the inclusionary housing ordinance, which would have required 25% affordability. As currently adopted, the inclusionary housing requirements are higher in our county than most neighboring jurisdictions. Neighboring jurisdictions such as the city of Fort Bragg have inclusionary housing requirements at 15% and some other flexibility in other programs. City of Ukiah does not have a locally adopted inclusionary housing ordinance, but they do have other housing programs, and they had included in their 2014 to 2019 housing element that they were going to establish an inclusionary housing ordinance, but then actually in their 2019 to 2027 housing element determined that studies have shown that when a lack of developer demand exists for housing development, adopting ordinances such as an inclusionary housing ordinance can have the unintended consequence of further restricting housing development. And they ultimately concluded that they had sufficient incentive-based programs that did not warrant the adoption of an inclusionary housing ordinance.
Add one thing to that. There was a state case that made inclusionary housing for rental housing actually illegal. So you can only now require it for built house or for sale housing anyway.
Thank you for that addition. Yeah. Then finally, I'll just mention that there's some statistics provided within the memorandum that speak to sort of what this looked like from an inclusionary housing component in our current regulations versus what would be potentially required underneath state density bonus law. And I will say most of our compliance with low and very low income housing has actually been the result of really specific targeted multifamily projects, those done by the Rural Communities Housing Development Corporation in recent years in the Ukiah Valley. And then also noting that the in lieu fees that I mentioned, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, over the last 15 years, it has resulted in about $150,000 in that Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is really minimal assistance that could be provided for affordable housing projects given current expense with construction. And say it was used for like a first-time home buyer program and maybe down payments, assuming like $50,000 or something like that, that would still only help potentially 3 families. So it has a really minimal benefit that's being provided at this point. So as a result, we are recommending repeal of the inclusionary housing ordinance in its current format, and again, a replacement chapter with 20.234 establishing a voluntary program for state density bonus law, which we'll talk about a little bit more when we get into proposed amendments. So those are the chapters proposed for repeal, and then now I'm going to start talking about proposed amendments, including new chapters, and then amendments to the entirety of the text. So just generally, we determined that we had originally discussed reorganizing and reformatting our code. And in working through this with staff, we actually determined that the current layout is the most user-friendly that we think would work for our community in terms of staff being able to utilize it, and with the public, with some changes made to do cross-referencing and consolidation of information into chapters, so you're not jumping around to different chapters to find a complete answer. So we also implemented some, I guess I'll say, administrative sort of changes within the code. So we looked at just either clarifications, correcting references, and then also added some administration components. So, information to assist in determining what the appropriate appeal body is, the authority for the planning and building director, the planning commission, the board of supervisors, and some of those processing requirements. So administrative fixes in that regard.
Yeah, I had a question. Did our consultant read that
Commissioner
part?
Wiedemann, could you speak into your microphone more directly so people that are not in the room can hear you?
I had a question on what you said as far as keeping the same format. Is that what our consultant suggested too?
Well, our consultant had actually reformatted in a different capacity the code, and staff ultimately determined that that was not the most user-friendly version. It really, what the consultant had proposed to us was consolidating to make less chapters, but those chapters became exceedingly long. So you would suddenly have, rather than maybe, 15 or 20 chapters, you would have 10, but each of those was 50 to 90 pages long. Yes. So still the same amount of information, just less chapters. So then I'm going to talk through, so some of the proposed amendments include amendments to allowable uses in all zoning districts, including the elimination of minor use permits and moving all uses previously subject to a minor use permit as being subject to an administrative permit. And this will allow for us to really just refer to use permits are use permits. There's no minor, there's no major, and anything that was previously subject to a minor use permit is going to be subject to an administrative permit. The hearing body is the same, which is the zoning administrator. And there are the same provisions recommended to be included as part of these amendments that would allow the elevation of any permit for an administrative permit heard by the zoning administrator to the planning commission for consideration if deemed necessary. The second is to achieve consistency with state law surrounding daycare facilities, assisted living residential care facilities, employee housing, low barrier navigation centers, supportive housing, and transitional housing. And then in addition, a new commercial use type is proposed, which would allow the transient habitation, low intensity camping in certain zoning districts, provided there is a primary residential or agricultural use on the property. We also made some minor amendments to the general provisions section, chapter 20.004, for consistency purposes. Very minor amendments, just correcting some reference to the division. And then we have also what appeared to be a minor oversight regarding animal raising personnel in the ag, rangeland, forestland, and timber production zone zoning districts, where the higher intensity use of animal raising is permissible, but for some reason the lower intensity use of personnel was not listed as permissible. So next I'll talk through some of the new chapters. As part of the proposed amendments, there's several new chapters proposed. We're proposing 2 new zoning districts, the MUNS, the Mixed Use North State District, and MUBST, the Mixed Use Brush Street Triangle District. And these chapters are proposed to be added to implement the Ukiah Valley Area Plan. When the UVAP was originally adopted, 3 new land use designations were created. It was the Mixed Use General, Mixed Use North State, and Mixed Use Brush Street Triangle. And we did not, however, create implementing zoning districts at that time. So in 2014, the county did adopt the first of the 3 zoning districts, which was the mixed-use general zoning district, which implemented that mixed-use general land use classification. We're now proposing to add the 2 remaining zoning districts to implement the Ukiah Valley Area Plan. The 2 new zoning districts are structured like all other zoning districts with permitted uses, density standards, and floor area ratio that is based upon the Ukiah Valley Area Plan land use designations. And additionally, it should be noted that once the zoning districts are established, future development will be evaluated on a project basis for consistency with the zoning regulations, and if necessary, any environmental review is conducted at that time of project implementation. Because the mixed-use districts propose a more intensive review over properties that are zoned this way for either a single-use project or a mixed-use project that doesn't comply with some of the objective standards, which we'll talk through when we get there. But this is structured very similarly to the MU2 zoning district, which was adopted in 2014. So next, Chapter 20.166, accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. This chapter is added to just move some of the standards for accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units out of Chapter 20.164, which is currently our accessory use regulations, and into a standalone chapter. There still is reference that both accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units are permitted accessory uses in Chapter 20.164, but just the standards have been relocated to this standalone chapter. Some of the, I'll pause here just to note that as was posted online as well this morning too, Commissioner Jones did submit some comments on this particular chapter. So we'll talk through those in more detail as well, because we do believe there are some changes that would need to be made to what staff has proposed to address some of those comments for consistency with state law as well. So we'll talk about that when we get to that chapter. The next chapter that was added is movable tiny homes, Chapter 20.170. In recent years, tiny homes has been an alternative to create affordable housing in California, and many jurisdictions utilize this tool. I will note that this is truly related to movable tiny homes, as stick-built or permanent construction tiny homes are permissible today, and we also have Appendix AQ that was adopted with the 2022 California Building Code that provides relaxed standards for tiny homes under 400 square feet in size. This adoption of this particular chapter will help to move us forward with some of our affordable housing goals within the county's housing element regarding diversity of housing options. So we look forward to your consideration of this chapter. This chapter has been, and the standards within have been discussed with the Board of Supervisors. And there was some recommendations provided by them at that time, which have been included. I also consulted with the Tiny Home Industry Association and did receive comments from them as well. So there's been some vetting by folks that have done some of this actual construction and development of movable tiny homes. So what you see in here is that the chapter includes that essentially tiny homes, since they're regulated by the DMV, and would have wheels still and a chassis for movement, there's some restrictions around it that really make it so it would appear like a stick-built structure. So that's like skirting requirements around the base, and then also some standards around some of what, utilities and things and what you can have on the outside of the structure. I will note that the movable tiny home does not include recreational vehicles or travel trailers, and we'll talk about that when we get to that portion as well. But there is some regulations around insulation and such that affect that. This is not a new use type, which is what I want to make really clear. This is considered family residential single family or potentially an accessory dwelling unit. So it's not a separate standalone use type. It just really is another form of a primary residence or an accessory dwelling unit that you can build on your property. And the way it's currently written would allow for both a primary movable tiny home and an accessory movable tiny home to be constructed on a property. So conceptually, you could have two movable tiny homes on a property and be in conformance with county regulations. Administration is a new chapter, 20.190. It lays out the basic roles, responsibilities, and functions for all planning authorities, including the Board of Supervisors, Planning Commission, Zoning Administrator, and the Planning and Building Services Director. And it provides a single location for all public hearing procedures and noticing, procedures for modification and revocation of approved permits or approvals, and administrative withdrawal of abandoned applications, application forms and fees, and review of applications. So just consolidating all that information to one chapter that can be referenced in the various administrative permits, variance, and use permit chapters. And then finally, Chapter 20.234, which we've talked about a little bit in the repeal of 20.238, is a new affordable housing and density bonuses chapter, and it includes density bonus and incentive program consistent with state density bonus law in government code, and procedures associated with those types of applications. The chapter also includes a bridge for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which are those funds that I was mentioning, the $150,000 that was previously collected. Yes, please.
So I'm just wondering to maybe ask for a procedural thing, because I read all this and it's very comprehensive, and you're giving a very comprehensive overview again. And I'm just wondering, well, everything that you're already presented is fresh in our mind, rather than going through all the separate amendments. Maybe we could bring it back to the Planning Commission and talk through the major amendments first, and then come back to you for all the minor amendments, because I already read it all, and it's kind of hard to listen to it all at one time and hold it in my little brain.
I'm happy to proceed however the commission would like, so I defer to you
about that. And I would also just like us to consider, maybe instead of starting at the beginning, if we start at the meaty bits, because that's when I think our minds are freshest, and maybe start on the new amendments first while we're still fresh and bushy-tailed. Just a suggestion.
I'm all in favor of bushy tails. Before we move on, are there any, and I think, I agree, I think at least, I want to make sure that this is also accessible to the public. I think we've all read the packets, we know this, so I want to make sure that this information, if there's an additional information that the director would like to provide for the benefit of the public at large, that we give that opportunity to do so. But I'm also in favor of moving into the meaty bits when
and I totally
presentation
agree with
concludes,
that. And my suggestion was to come back to her report when we get into the unmeaty bits.
Okay.
I think if it would be acceptable to the commission, just before we start into each chapter, I can give a little overview of what we're about to dive into, and then we can go through your specific comments.
That sounds
works
good.
for you.
Is there anything else you want to make sure gets put out in front of the public before we dive into the nitty-gritty of it all?
Well, I think we'll talk about that at the very end too. I do, of course, want to mention the CEQA component within the memorandum and the addendum that was posted as well. So as part of this ordinance preparation, we did prepare an addendum to the general plan and Ukiah Valley Area Plan environmental impact reports, and that's an attachment to your packet, Exhibit B to the resolution as well, and really talks through why there is no, potential physical impacts associated with implementation of the proposed ordinances, and none of the conditions that are included in section 15162 calling for preparation of any subsequent environmental documents have occurred. So of course, happy to talk about if you have any specific questions on that, but we did include an analysis within that addendum as to why no additional environmental review is required because of the consistency with the previous environmental impact reports. So I think that's the only one thing I wanted to add, and now I'm happy to jump to whichever chapter you all would like to start with. And we could start with the new chapters if you would like.
Great. Yeah, so I had a couple, just in hearing some of the comments, seeing some of the things that were presented by the public and my own read, there were a couple that jumped out at me that I think would make sense, and I'd just query the rest of the commission if there's other ones that are on there. I thought that the tiny homes chapter probably high on the list. The low intensity camping would be on there for me. Some review of employee housing and how that's changed. Are there other specific areas that we want to get to on the earlier side?
I think the ADU ordinance.
Great. Any others?
I just want to talk about the shift from minor and major use permits all to administrative permits. I want to have a discussion about that.
Great. All right. Commissioner Ponel Babini.
And I think this can definitely be at the end. There were some things that I think we could incorporate in the definition section. One that wasn't was our previous project from our last meeting, which was a battery energy storage system, which isn't listed in there, and I would love to add.
I agree that there's some changes and additions that we'll need to make to the definition section. I don't know if that's a meaty bit, but I have comments.
Great. Yeah. I'm sure we all have lots of comments on minutia throughout, but maybe we'll We'll take the big stuff first, and then we can get into wordsmithing. Okay. Well, if it suits the rest of the commission, I would say that we start with the movable tiny homes chapter.
Anybody know off the top of their head what page that is?
199.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think.
Do you want to give a quick little?
I think I've sort of, I kind of already hit on it, but I'll
so.
just do a really brief overview. So again, movable tiny homes, entirely new chapter. This is not a new use type though. It is fit into existing either family residential, single family, or as an accessory dwelling unit. So again, it would be subject to any of the zoning district standards for the district in which it is located. So setbacks, height, etc., unless further regulated within the chapter, which height is one of those requirements that is. But it's not necessarily a new standalone use. Again, either a primary residence or an accessory dwelling unit, and it would be permissible under the proposed chapter to conceptually have both a movable tiny home as a primary residence and a movable tiny home as an accessory dwelling unit. So the chapter is laid out. It has the permitted locations. You have your development and design standards, and I'm happy to walk through each one of those but I can also see if the commission just has questions about any specifics within there.
I would go with the specific questions if that makes sense. Otherwise, we'll be here for weeks. So are there particular comments on this section that I would like to make? Mr. Jones?
Sure, I have one comment, and I ran into this when I was doing the tiny home ordinance for the city of Fort Bragg. It turns out HCD considers any parcel with 2 mobile homes on it or more a mobile home park, which is subject to very specific HCD regulations. And we initially, in our single family, in our ADU ordinance, allowed a tiny home for the primary residence and the second ADU. So I think there might be a problem with the and or, so that it can serve as a single family dwelling, accessory dwelling unit, and or second residential unit, insofar as you'll be getting people into having basically a mobile home park that's regulated under HCD without them knowing it. So maybe you want to be explicit that that's what's happening in the ordinance and up to you guys, or limit it to 1 per parcel unless it is in a mobile home park. And then the way we dealt with it at the city of Fort Bragg is we did not have any minimum area for a mobile home park. So if someone wants to willingly put 2, 3 tiny homes, 4 tiny homes on a single family residential district, as long as it complies with the density requirements, they could do it on any size parcel. That's how we kind of finessed it at the city of Fort Bragg. So it's kind of a big comment.
Let's just start off with a bang.
Commissioner Babini, did you have something on that?
Yeah, I think that for the potential issues running in with HCD, because I've dealt with them extensively, I think, maybe just I like the elimination of the lot size. Just some kind of forewarning or notification to people that this is something they will also have to comply with would be very beneficial, so that it's not a blind side when they put 2 on.
Yep. Any other comments from commissioners on that? And I'd just like to invite comment from staff on that.
Sure, thank you. So HCD, I'm actually surprised to hear this, because I think they have been maybe not so willing to weigh in such definitive terms in the past. So I have not seen like an update to their informational bulletin or anything like that, but I could easily see that maybe this was correspondence on a specific ordinance. So it's something that I would likely want to vet with HCD, because previously they had stated essentially that they were, kind of keeping their hands off of the movable tiny homes component. But it would be worthwhile to explore that. So that might be something that I would need to come back to the commission on.
And I can also email you the section of law about it.
Okay.
in your correspondence with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does appear from a quick look at their website that perhaps there's a qualification that only if those are held out for rent or lease does that trigger. If it's an owner.
Yeah, but if you have tiny units, you're probably renting them out to people.
Potentially.
Unless they're your friends and family.
Or if they're your family. Commissioner Wiedemann?
Yeah, I just had a logistic question. So when a parcel has two tiny homes on it, and they're, in a way, because they're movable, more capable to be moved, when they want to apply for a larger single-family residence, what happens with that tiny home? Does it become you take the kitchen out? You know, what is the process for that?
Thank you for that question. So if somebody wished to develop a larger residential structure, typically the movable tiny home would have to no longer be in use. And we do allow for the temporary storage of travel trailers, as you know, and dead storage. And this, since it is regulated by the DMV, could conceptually fit within that area as well. If they wanted to permit it as an allowable accessory use, that's a whole other conversation to have about how we would be able to permit that with our building division as well. So it would be something we'd have to talk through with folks because we have not previously permitted things like a travel trailer as an accessory use. So typically what we would see is that person would move the unit off of the property, probably by selling it or something along those lines. But
so I have another comment.
On this particular section or on this
on the ordinance. Yeah.
On the 2 unit. Okay, I've got some more on this one.
Okay.
Just real quick as a follow-up question on that because it popped up somewhere else in the code. What is our definition of dead storage?
It means not connected to any utilities. Any connection to utilities at all is considered then evidence that you would be occupying the trailer.
Okay.
So it's handled through an enforcement basis. If we get a complaint about it, we'll head out to the property to take a look.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great name.
Wasn't that great? Yeah, great.
I have a question about the intent of this.
Commissioner Purnell, could you use your microphone a little more?
I'll start with turning it on. How's
There you
that?
go, that'll help.
Yeah. Okay. I have a question about the intent of the chapter because the way that this is written, I actually see this being of limited use to Mendocino County because right now it's just going to apply to those movable tiny homes that can meet the technical definitions, including some of, you know, the insulation, window requirements. And I think we all know that some of the DIY home-built tiny homes just don't and won't meet those requirements. But additionally, I can think of a number of scenarios where someone is not wanting to have a tiny home be a permanent single-family residence or ADU. It's more of a temporary strategy for getting on a piece of property while they save money. Maybe they haven't started a family yet, and it's like a 2-year or a 3-year or a 5-year thing. So basically, out of all of the universe, the entire universe of scenarios for tiny homes, I actually see this chapter being for a pretty small percentage of that universe, and I'm just wondering if that's anything we want to try to address or if we're just going to go with this narrow definition. And I hope that makes sense.
Sure. Well, I'll try to comment on that a little bit. I think a lot of the DIY tiny homes have not been properly regulated through the California Department of Motor Vehicles. So that's one first note that I will make. And it's something that really should be completed by individuals to qualify under this chapter. And there'll be certain standards that have to be met as part of doing that as well. The reason for including some of the standards regarding insulation and such is to really also preclude your typical travel trailer or recreational vehicle from being able to be included as part of these types of units, because the idea is to really not change the character of the community, to still have structures that appear like a residential stick-built structure on a property. But still allow for this more flexibility for those movable units. So I think I'll add those, but it sounded a little bit of a philosophical question as well to the commissioners on what you may wish to see in the regulation.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that, I'm really just curious about those tiny homes that just don't and won't qualify. Where does that fall? Does that fall exclusively on code enforcement?
That would fall on if they're being occupied. Yes, that would be part of a code. If we received a complaint, then yes, it would be part of a code enforcement action. But then additionally, if they are non-compliant, there may also be challenges that they could be facing with the Department of Motor Vehicles, say if they were to be towing that down the highway.
Okay, thank you.
There's also, just for clarity, a Uniform Building Code has a section that's just for tiny homes. It's called Appendix Q. And in our ordinance, we just referenced Appendix Q rather than providing all this detail, because Appendix Q could change, and then you have the problem of your ordinance, not law. And if someone's spending $30,000 to build a tiny home, which is realistically the least it would cost just for materials, they should be looking up Appendix Q and doing it properly so that it has good resale value, for example, if they're not going to use it in 2 years. And so that is my opinion.
Well, and if I may, I believe you're referring to for stick-built structures, though, not movable structures.
No, Appendix Q is for movable tiny homes. It's specifically for that purpose. And it's partly because the, I forget there's a ANSI, the ANSI regulations that's more like a federal regulation for, what are they called? The RV park models. And then the Appendix Q allows someone to do a tiny home that's a little more like customized, like their own kind of personality in there. Whereas the ANSI regulations for the park model RVs are, I don't know, less creative, I guess would be say it.
Okay. Can you bring that up, Julia?
Well, I'll want to confer with our building official on that as well too.
So we
but
can come back to this.
But I guess that was not my understanding.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, fair.
But Marie, following up on what you said about Appendix Q, would that be the bulk of Section B, design?
Well, it's a little bit different because it talks about, like, if you have an upstairs, how much clear do you need? If you're sleeping in a loft for like safety, so it has different things than this. It's been a while since I've looked at it, honestly, so I'd have to look at it again.
Sounds like they may not sync
carefully.
well right now.
What?
Sounds like Appendix Q in this may not sync well.
Well, parts of it sync and parts of it don't.
Okay.
So, like, it does require the kitchen. It does not require skirting. I don't remember about insulation, if it's exactly the same or not. You know, when we're at a break, I'd be happy to look it up and talk. A little hard to multitask that much.
I did have a quick comment to something you said, Allison, about the temporary uses tiny home. While say they're maybe moving onto a piece of property they bought and they want to build a bigger home. I wasn't sure if that fell into that temporary occupancy for, say, a travel trailer or other movable home type that they could use. I think it's 2 years, right?
Yeah, so I mean, really it's an either or scenario. If you were wanting to do temporary occupancy of a travel trailer or another dwelling unit while you're constructing a primary residence, there's a procedure for that in our temporary use regulations, which exists today.
Yeah.
And then similarly, say they wanted to build or, you know, actually rather than doing the temporary occupancy, occupy a tiny home as their residence and then proceed with and not even have a building permit application in for the stick-built, you know, long-term housing yet, they could still do so complying with this ordinance, and that doesn't preclude them from applying for a building permit to be able to construct that larger dwelling in the future.
I also had another, okay. In the development and design standards, and I'm not sure now, listening to Commissioner Jones about Appendix Q in regards to B8, which is the utility connection, if there would be any conflict in us changing some of this language, and we may need to have some kind of discussion with the building and environmental health, but changing it for the sewer and for septic utilities, the dedicated pipes, and allowing just have an approved waste disposal method. I know that housing is very difficult for some of our more rural areas, and what restricting potentially a pumping contract or some other waste disposal system, I would like to leave that up to environmental health versus including that in the zoning code if possible.
Well, I'm certainly open to a composting toilet concept here. I'm a little more, approved by environmental health. I'm sure they have some process to approve one.
I like composting toilets. No, I agree. I had a similar thought that having it specifically designated that they had to be on septic or sewer limits the universe of possibilities that might make sense in the situation. And I do imagine, right, that environmental health has a process by which they approve alternative wastewater treatment systems. Is that, or I know that's not
it wouldn't be regulated by the zoning code. So I think if there's alternative language that the commissioners want to see that references an adequate sewage disposal system, and whatever environmental health works out with an applicant through their policies and procedures, that would be acceptable to myself as well.
Yeah.
I took a stab at it.
Go for it.
Okay. So for B8, for the utility connections, I took a stab at a movable tiny home shall be connected to an approved water source and have an approved waste disposal method by the Department of Environmental Health. So just shortening it. And then still including a movable tiny home may use on or off grid electricity and may use propane for heating and cooking, and keep the generator provision in there as well. So really just changing that one first sentence.
I like that. And then Julia, I'm sorry, I did look up Appendix Q, and you are right, I was misremembering. So it is for when you put a tiny home on a foundation, it has to comply with Appendix Q. I still think so for number 3, foundation or pad. So a movable tiny home that's put on a foundation must comply with Appendix Q or something. You might want to add that.
We did adopt, it wouldn't be under movable tiny homes here because it would be permissible as any sort of residential structure. Similarly, again, like a single family home or an accessory dwelling unit. And really, with the 2022 California Building Code adoption, we adopted Appendix AQ as how it is in the California Building Code, which includes relaxed standards for those stick-built conventional construction tiny homes placed on a property. It has exceptions to like loft standards and some handrails and stairwells and things like that to really make it so you can work in those more confined spaces.
So I think maybe I didn't clearly state it. What you have here is foundation or pad.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're putting a movable tiny home onto a foundation per California state law, it needs to comply with Appendix Q. So that's what I'm asking to be added.
Well, and I guess while we're talking about that, I also had a question and a concern a little bit about the requirement for it being a paved parking pad. I would think that if it could be on a
gravel pad.
A gravel pad that was,
Yeah,
specifically was compacted, and again, I didn't take a stab. I don't have the best language in front of me for what we could put in there, but I would like to see that struck or expanded upon. I know that there is a provision that says at the discretion of the director, it could be a different alternative paving method, which is great, but I guess I feel like it would be more user-friendly if it was clear what those methods could be, that it wasn't on a case-by-case basis to have to approve something that was other than a paved.
Sure, I would just suggest if you change that it would be, if you want to look at gravel, I would make sure that it's clear it's compacted gravel.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
I have a couple of phrases, not necessarily an entire rewrite on it, but compacted all-weather surface And then also just thinking we could tie this into, low impact development goals too, because I mean, with LID, we're not paving things when we don't have to.
So I did take a stab at reworking that one as well. And so for the foundation or pad, I put in there, an approved designated parking area shall be required, including bumper guards, curbs, or other installations adequate to prevent movement of the unit. I felt that adding that in there, especially since it says alternative paving methods may be permitted at the discretion of the director, allows for kind of discussion on the building side on what would be approved there. I don't know if we need to state every method in the zoning code, since it is more of a fine. Yeah, I just think taking out the paved portion at the beginning is really helpful, and just say an approved.
If it would be acceptable to the commission, I would suggest that using Commissioner Babini's recommended language and Commissioner Parnell's, saying an approved approved designated parking area of compacted all-weather surface, or something along those lines, including bumper guards, et cetera, because we do want to make sure it's clear that there is a compacted surface that's there, because really, it's really to prevent, it's for safety.
For sure.
Your unit doesn't start rolling
Yeah.
with you inside of it.
Well, and that's why I definitely want to leave that second portion. So I'm happy with, an approved designated parking area of compacted all-weather surface shall be required. I think great, because I do believe that, we want to allow housing wherever possible, and we don't want to put some development things that may not be required on the building permit side in the zoning code.
Does staff feel like have sufficient direction to make some modifications? To
Yes.
Great. I've got a couple others, but are there any other? I get to go?
You get to go.
All right. So the next one is on section 4, mechanical equipment. It says that mechanical equipment shall be incorporated into the structure and not be located on the roof except for solar panels. And I guess I was just hopeful that there could be some clarification of what is included on the into the structure, that includes the chassis, because I've seen many tiny homes in which there's a on-demand hot water heater that's on the outside of the structure, or a compressor on the outside of the structure. And I just want to make sure that it wasn't intended that all of those mechanical equipment must be enclosed within the shell of the structure itself. So I don't know if we need to add additional language, or if it was clear on staff's.
Why don't you just say mechanical equipment shall not be on the roof except for solar panels?
Does that meet the needs of
It's
staff?
at the will of the commission what you would like to recommend.
I guess I was just curious as to what the intention was in.
It's really intended so that way you don't have if you would not traditionally have a water heater on the outside of a stick-built residence, to not have it on the outside of a
I have one
movable tiny home.
There's lots of on-demand water heaters that are on the outside of stick.
Well, and so I think the idea is to treat it similar to a stick-built structure that you may have, or things such as propane tanks, things like that, that may be, well, actually not propane tanks. No, so I think that it could work within just saying the roof structure.
Okay. So should we just, would that work?
Do we even need it?
Well, I think the idea is that we're trying to distinguish it in some way from like an RV that has its AC unit on the roof. Right, they're AC, right, but they're usually not up on the roof of most things, except for,
I guess maybe a better way to do this is just say that at the very beginning, under declarations, a tiny home is not an RV.
And I think that
would solve our problem.
Well, and I think, between all of the requirements that are in here, I think this is sort of doubling down on those types of requirements anyway. So, it up to the commission, it may not be that the mechanical equipment requirement is even necessary, and perhaps that can be struck.
I think we could just
I
strike
would
it.
try to keep it simple. The point is to make it affordable for people to get on their property so that they could develop their property. So I think we have to, for me, as a commissioner, I would think in terms of keep it simple.
Yep.
Keep it simple.
Let's just strike 4.
Strike 4?
Yeah. I don't think we need it.
Yeah. I think striking 4 would be fine because, again, they are going through the building permit process. If there's something for life safety, environmental health, something that is not allowed.
They're not going through the building permit process. Do not need a building permit for a tiny home.
Oh, only for the utility connection.
Okay, sorry, that's.
Just so you know.
Yes, and thank you for the correction. I would think that if there was something that they were concerned about with life safety, that that's in a different matter.
I have a funny little thing on number 5. I don't know if we need to use the brand name Hardy Panel.
I
Perhaps,
agree.
perhaps cement fiberboard
I
would be
agree.
more appropriate.
Yeah.
On that same one, there's also a provision that does not allow for interlocked metal sheathing, which again, I think perhaps was to try and distinguish it from an Airstream or some sort, but there are many tiny homes that are built with interlocking standing seam metal siding, which again, as a buyer, from a buyer perspective would be.
And prefab ones can typically sometimes have that, I believe.
Yeah. So
I think if you've already said that they shall include wood, hardy panel, or equivalent material, I think we could just strike the second sentence because you've already said they shall include, so you don't need to say what they don't need to include.
Instead of hardy panel, just say cementitious.
Why do we,
Because that's what it's.
if it's just a shall, that section at all? I mean, is there
For materials, you
yeah,
mean?
like are we trying to maintain for the maintenance of aesthetic preference? I'm just curious.
Well, I think from the city of Fort Bragg's perspective, which is much more dense than the county, it was definitely from the perspective of aesthetics.
It wasn't for fire or anything, because some of those are.
Well, cement board is great for fire, obviously
right.
it's better, but from our perspective, it was definitely for looks. Now, in all of Mendocino County, there are some areas that are a little bit more urbanized, and people might get pretty pissed off if something pretty funky is suddenly next door to them. So I think it's reasonable to ask for wood, hardy panel, or other similar material, because that's pretty wide open. Unless you're wanting to like do the outside of your tiny home with smashed cans, for example, or something really weird, which I don't know, as determined
not
by the
unheard of.
director. And that falls under as determined by the director.
If I may, if the concern is about fire safety components, there is underneath the applicable code section, there is going to have to be an inspection and certification for
By the fire
compliance
code.
with ANSI or NFPA codes. So that is going to be required regardless, so ensuring that the structure is fire safe. So this is more of an appearance type of discussion. So, and I will say with the Board of Supervisors, generally, they did not want to have, they wanted to allow for materials that would be allowed on a conventional single-family home as part of it, so.
Is interlocked metal sheathing the same as corrugated roofing?
No.
Okay, so corrugated roofing as siding would be allowed under this? I want to make sure that it is. I think it's important that it be
I
allowed
think
because
corrugated roofing is allowed now on single.
yeah, it's on mine. Yeah.
Right.
I just don't know what interlocked metal
I think we
sheathing
can
is.
just delete the second sentence and we're fine.
And we're fine, okay.
Yeah, because then that gives the director
fine.
the opportunity to decide what's.
And we would work closely too with our building division
Right.
because of that, making
just
sure
the
that
higher
it's
end.
similar.
Higher end metal interlocking.
Okay, thank you.
I
So
had a,
just to note what I captured on that, so striking hardy panel, and that would be reading for cement fiberboard instead, and then deleting the second sentence.
All right, we got through one.
Yeah,
I had one further question,
Please.
just so that B8 isn't conflicting with section 2170.025, the inspections required for tiny homes for A, since it says all utility connections shall be inspected for compliance with the applicable codes. I just want to make sure that there's not going to be any conflicting if we maybe allow for some sort of pumping contracts, that it doesn't conflict
No.
in any way.
No,
Okay.
because that section 025 is specific to the building official.
Okay, great.
Just since we are kind of taking this chunk by chunk, and I see that we do have some members of the public here, I think it would be appropriate for us to invite public comment after each section if someone's here on that specific topic. So I'll open this up to public comment if there's anyone here that wants to speak on the movable tiny home section. Please mic and speak your name and.
Hello, my name is Lindsay Wood with Build More Houses Now, formerly the Tiny Home Lady, and I'm really inspired by what you're doing here. Thank you, Director Krog, for all the work you've done. And actually, some of the language we're reading is from my mentor, Dan Fitzpatrick, who's worked with 18 jurisdictions around the state of California. You are on the right track. Some of these things like interlocking metal, sheathing have been a little sticking point. Other things like hardy board and all that. So from an industry perspective, where we see these jurisdictions and all this language show up elsewhere, being able to simplify and really expedite the process is wonderful. Definitely doubling down. I will be walking over to the environmental health and sharing with them some other waste systems, septic systems, because that's the next big hurdle. The movable tiny homes also are very customizable. We had to use ANSI and NFPA because it was the only standard out there. There's a current task force that's in the nation that's being worked on that's going to be looking at creating a small residential unit standard. That would be the 5th standard that our country will be seeing, but that's still to be worked out. So thank you so much. And I'm here available for any questions that you guys may have. Thank you.
Sure, well, there's one Commissioner Babini has a question.
So if we are including that language then of the fire safety standards of ANSI and NFPA code, if this is our new zoning code and things do change, are then everything, yes, thank you.
I'll bring it back then.
Okay,
If it
thank
change,
you.
we will bring it back for
Great.
amendments, yes.
We won't
wait 20 years. We won't wait 20
No,
years.
that was my concern.
Yay. Yes.
My recommendation in this wonderful county without fire is heavily doubling down on fireproofing materials. That wood is beautiful, but you know, there you are tucked in the wonderful forest. So
When you go talk to environmental health, just have them look up clean slate, what they did for septic waste system.
Thank you.
It was a way a lot of people lived for many years, and it got them into a piece of property, right? And it's very affordable.
Great, thank you. Keyword.
And I'll just note for the commission, Lindsay is one of the individuals who I did work with on drafting the regulations.
Thank you. All right, anything else on movable tiny homes? Great, let's move them along then.
I have someone on Zoom with their hand raised.
Oh, great. Ms. Wynn, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I have 4 questions. One, it would be good to know if a tiny home could be converted to a guest cottage by removing the kitchen. Also, number 2, I think it would be helpful to clarify that a tiny home is not an RV within the language of this ordinance. That would be helpful just for, you know, when our clients say, hey, I want to use a tiny home, and then they push and they say, I want to have an RV. And then if it's in the ordinance right there, it just makes it that much more clear. And then also clarifying that the aesthetic goal is for it to look similar to a single family residence. With the language about the siding, and the siding should be similar to wood, cementitious board, or equivalent material. Clarity on whether that would allow for metal siding would be important. We have some very high-end residential homes that have metal siding as well as metal roofing. So I think if we just clarify that the aesthetic goal is that this looks like a residence, though tiny and movable, that would be helpful and allow for more creativity. And then the last aspect is relative to environmental health, and I don't have this fully formulated in my mind, but I know that you know, perhaps there's an unintended consequence of, you know, having you know, 1 or 2 tiny homes on a property, or 1 tiny home on a property and a residence on a property. Right now, the bedroom definition makes it difficult to, I mean, sometimes the septic systems are grossly oversized because someone might have in their normal residence an exercise room, a studio space, what have you, and then the addition of a tiny home might then further require more expansion of their septic system. So I'm just wondering if when we get to thinking about environmental health, maybe there's some flexibility in that bedroom definition. So again, I'm sorry, that's not fully formulated. That's kind of just thinking about sometimes barriers to adding density to a property has to do with septic as well. Thank you for listening to my comments.
Thank you very much. Director Krog, do you have any response to any of those questions?
I think the question regarding a guest cottage is a little bit more challenging because I just don't know that that would actually be something that could be feasible, since we have not included allowance for these structures to be utilized that are on wheels for accessory uses. Now, say if they were to like remove the chassis for movement and actually place it permanently upon the ground, and get approved building permits through that process, then there may be a pathway to do that. So it's a little bit dependent and would likely require that engineering be completed as part of that. And then I think that already the environmental health component has been addressed. And I'm sorry, there was one more in there, I think, that I...
She wanted to have the RV language, which I already recommended at the beginning.
Yep.
I guess I'm just curious on that. I understand that it's a bigger question around the guest cottage one, but if these are being inspected and approved through these third-party inspectors, would that not sort of qualify them as structurally sound enough to be utilized as a guest cottage?
No.
Okay.
That would not be compliance with the California Building Code.
Okay.
Yeah, if they were compliant with Appendix Q.
Yes,
then
AQ.
they could be. Yeah. So, that's something we could add, like a tiny home could be used as a guest cottage if the kitchen is removed and it's put on a foundation and built per Appendix Q. I think you could add that, maybe.
Well, I think, quite frankly, I think those are going to be probably like maybe not your standard scenario that you may run into. And I think I wouldn't want to include necessarily regulation in the zoning regulation, because it is something that's really going to have to be sorted out with the building division on how you properly permit that. So those conversations should happen if an individual is looking to do that with the building division to establish, can this meet the requirements to be permitted as a residential accessory structure on a property, but not on wheels. Yeah.
Deputy County Counsel, you got eyebrows raised. Is there something you want to say? Okay. Commissioner Babini, you had another comment?
No, that covered.
Okay.
Covered mine.
All right.
Go ahead. I was going to say, before we move on to the next section, could we take a 5-minute recess? Well,
and I was in concurrent with Amy's recommendation that we add something about the aesthetic goal of this being similar to a single-family home or ADU, and I am curious if the appropriate place for that is in B5 under materials.
And if I may, there is a sentence at the beginning of B that may speak to that already. It says a movable tiny home shall maintain a residential appearance through the following design standards.
Look at that, it's already there.
Thank you.
Yes.
Great.
No smashed cans, people. Sorry. All right. Is 5 minutes enough? Great. Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 10:51.
There's some amazing smashed cans houses in New Mexico.
Para nuevos papás, entonces creo que es de gran ayuda.
No queda mucho que agregar, pero lo veo de la misma forma.
Que hemos aprendido algunas cosas aquí y pues los han ayudado, como este programa los ha ayudado para seguir creciendo a la bebé, como con buenos consejos y así.
Sí, y creo que también ha sido muy importante el tema de apoyarnos con el libro y saber qué actividades hacer con Máximo de acuerdo a su edad, cómo estimularlo, cómo cuidarlo de los peligros de la casa, como cosas que uno como papá nuevo no conoce, claro.
Pues a mí me gustaría que lo siguiéramos visitando aquí en la biblioteca de Covelo. Está tranquilo y muy bonito aquí.
Cuando no nos podemos reunir, nos comunicamos por Zoom o una llamada telefónica o por texto.
Donde nos visité, porque ha sido nuestra casa. A veces nosotros vamos a Wellits y puede ser en el parque. Gaby llega, como hacemos un resumen de cómo ha ido nuestra semana o qué hemos hecho de nuevo, cómo va el trabajo. Luego hacemos las actividades del libro. Vemos si podemos hacer un juguetito nuevo para Máximo. A veces ella lo evalúa, cómo está su sentido motriz, qué ha aprendido de nuevo, nuevas palabras, y jugamos un ratito y conversamos.
A mí personalmente también me ayudó mucho a obtener mi licencia a conducir, que era un objetivo que teníamos en cuanto a la familia,
sí,
para poder estar tranquilos, así que encuentro que ha sido fundamental el apoyo.
El objetivo del programa es que las familias estén bien, y que las familias estén bien significa niños felices, niños sanos, y eso en un futuro es adultos sanos y un mundo mejor. Entonces está bueno.
She has made me feel like I'm important and I can go at my own pace, and that's all you need sometimes when you're feeling like you got nobody.
It was helpful to have somebody there kind of holding my hand and guiding me and letting me know this is kind of the normal. It felt like I was becoming a new mom, so it was very interesting and helpful, very, very helpful.
You know, there was that self-conscious part of me, like, will I be accepted even though I'm not perfect?
What I like the most is that she really listens.
The support that she gives me is special because she does it with love, and it's just natural, you know? That's all I could say. It just feels like somebody that I've known since I was little.
You know, I said to Jeanette, Jeanette, you're supposed to be with me for 5 years. Jeanette said, yeah, I know, I'm going to be with you guys for 5 years. That's when I said, well, I guess I can trust her. She's going to be with us for 5 years.
Yo creo que quizás pasó como a la segunda visita o algo así, como que ya nos presentamos formalmente. Y luego ya creo que en la segunda visita estaba como todo más tranquilo, como muy, como que el ambiente era muy familiar. Entonces yo me sentí muy cómoda.
I felt like she cared for Sparrow too, and Sparrow really enjoyed it. Yeah, she knew when Gabby came we were going to be making something or learning something, and she'd instantly start digging through Gabby's bags to find out what activity we were going to do.
Not only did we get the assistance with this program, but we also made a really good friend. I'm happy to call Gabby our friend.
I think the relationship that we've built has been just, she's a part of the family.
Are you prepared? We're the Office of Emergency Services, and we're committed to providing the most up-to-date and accurate information so that you and your family can stay safe during an emergency. Visit MendoReady.org. It's our one-stop shop for emergency information. You can sign up for emergency alerts, find your pre-established evacuation zone on our current emergencies map, and find hazard and preparedness information.
Imagine you're faced with a disaster such as a wildfire, and you're ordered to evacuate.
I'll bet you wish you had more time in that moment. Now's your chance to buy yourself that time. Sign up for Nixle and Mendo Alerts on our website, mendoready.org. Do it today.
If you want your family to be as resilient as possible, it's important to take some time today and visit mendoready.org, where you can look up your pre-established evacuation zones on our current emergencies map. You can also find important tools to help maintain your situational awareness, such as the Alert California wildfire cameras and the Caltrans road conditions cameras. We hope you'll take some time today to prepare so that your family can be Mendo ready. Thank you.
Get back online. Ooh, there we are. Oh, look at all these swipes. Can we do a star wipe? No, never mind. All right. All right, we are back in session. Just so everyone knows in the room and everyone, there's been a request from a couple commissioners that we need to be done at 1 o'clock today for some childcare and some healthcare reasons. So I'm going to try and keep us moving through as quickly as we can, and hopefully we can get through it all in that time. Is everyone okay if we go straight until 1? Okay, well, we'll... Yeah, okay. Well, we'll...
Definition.
Sure,
Well,
yeah.
and if I may, if any commissioners do depart, then it would be really important if this matter is continued to a future date that we ensure that you've watched the remainder of the meeting before that, so you have the full proceedings in front of you.
Great. Okay.
And if I may, just one comment for the commissioners, there is a new public comment that was posted from Hip Camp, and it's available online on the website. So if you refresh your Planning Commission agenda page, you'll see it there. Just bringing that to your attention, not that we've talked about that chapter quite yet.
Although we're just about to. Maybe we should... Well, that's where I was going next. Unless... Okay, great. Let's go there. All right, so moving on to low-intensity camping.
Yes, begins on 207, that overall chapter, because it's fed into an existing chapter
Yes.
on recreational vehicle parks, campgrounds, and now adding low-intensity camping. So just a brief overview. So staff added, because we are adding this addition of low-intensity camping, you'll see we amended several sections just to reflect that the provisions that were apply to recreational vehicle parks and campgrounds, and then low-intensity camping. So low-intensity camping is covered under 020 in here. And rather than me giving I'll give just a very brief overview of essentially stating that this comes out of, a lot of comments I think have been made in the past about sort of diversification of income for individuals that either are have residential use on their property or also have agricultural production on their property, and at a level that's not as intensive of going through, a use permit for a full-blown campground facility, which is only allowed in certain zoning districts. So the way this chapter is currently structured and proposed is that you would be allowed up to one camping site on a property with a business license meeting certain standards, and anything above that would require a administrative permit or use permit, allowing for that sort of public involvement in the process as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Commissioner Jones, start us off again.
Really not amazing, since I ran a campground for 4 long years. So if the commission decides to go with low-intensity camping, I have a couple of very strongly felt recommendations. One is that you don't just limit it by the number of sites, but also by the number of people, because you can have one site and have 100 people stay there and call it one site with one number on it. So that would be a primary recommendation, and to that end, I would also recommend a minimum parcel size of at least 5 acres. hip camp, 6 campgrounds on very small parcels. I myself made the mistake of staying on one up in Eureka, and it was right next to a road, and I had to go through the guy's stinky backyard, and it was a very small parcel, and it just did not make sense for camping. It's not really camping if you're on a really teeny parcel. You're basically just camping out in someone's backyard. So I would, and I would also recommend getting rid of the business license only alternative and requiring an administrative permit minimally. I think 10 people max if you have less than 10 acres, however many sites you have. 20 people max if you have less than 20 acres. And then you could go up to 30 people, or even 100 people if you want to, over 20 acres. That's what I would recommend, recognizing that I ran a campground that had 8 acres, on which I often had 100 campers. 100 campers is a lot of people. It's a lot of people, and it's a lot of noise, and I absolutely would feel very strongly that there needs to be an on-site person all the time if you're over 10 people, because you can't tell somebody that they're going to have to wait an hour for someone to get to the campsite to deal with whatever argument, fight, drunken brawl, people partying until 3 in the morning. I'm not kidding, I've dealt with all of this.
Or emergency.
Or emergency, naked man running through the campground, literally dealt with it.
Fire, anything, you know, to have somebody prepared with where the facilities are to deal with an
So I think
emergency.
that's super important. The other thing that I would recommend is a use permit if it's on a private road. Absolutely required to notify everybody who's got property on that private road. Those are the things I feel the most strong about. With that, must require fire extinguishers, must provide a trash service, must have designated spaces. The vehicle lights from those designated spaces must not go into any neighbor's house, and must include a site plan in the application. Those are my recommendations. Sorry, I have strong feelings having run a campground.
Director Krug, there was a lot in there. Did you capture?
I took notes. I captured
I can
most
go
of
over
that.
more slowly.
I'll probably go back to watch the video on the caps that you were discussing, if that's something that the commission does decide that they want to include as part of this. So just noting that there are some operational requirements included in the recommended language about no open flames. And then in terms of fire protection, I think adding that a fire extinguisher needs to be on site is a very simple addition. Trash service, there is section D7, which speaks to all trash being removed between each guest and properly disposed of. That could be, I'm unsure if that's acceptable or if it was something further thinking about. And then we do have the language on local contact person and hosting, I understand, about wanting to see that person be on site as opposed to within an hour. Yeah.
Right. The one thing with trash and campers is wild animals. So the trash gets spread out a lot if you don't have it controlled adequately. So it's more than just making sure that the trash gets removed. You actually have to have animal-proof trash containers.
And then one other item I just want to note too. So under section C, C2, there's discussion too about having separation from an offsite residence by 250 feet, trying to prevent those types of nuisances that may occur from being in close proximity to an adjacent property's residence. Their setbacks can only be reduced with obtaining a discretionary permit, an administrative permit or use permit as currently written. And then in addition, sanitation facilities would need to be screened from any sort of roadways or off-site locations.
Yeah, and my issue is more like a lot of campers get there at 9 and they leave their lights on as they set up the camp. And if you have a residential unit opposite those lights, that's super annoying because it's car lights in your windows.
I actually want to say that I'm actually not wanting this in RR zonings, period. And I know there's been a few instances in my district that people had to hire lawyers to prevent these kind of camps that started out with one campground, and it became a nuisance. And so RR zoning, you're adding a whole new use to an RR zoning, somebody buying into a residential place. There's lots of zonings. We have a huge county. We have lots of places for people to camp. And so that's my 2 cents. We could go into how we're regulating it and how we're trying to contain it, but the simplest way to do it is look at where we're permitting this. And I think if we take it out of somebody who is, whether it's an RR1, an RR5, and take the RR zoning out. We have lots of land and lots of larger, well, they're not even all larger parcels, but different zones, because I think it's conflictual.
Comments from other commissioners?
I guess I just had a comment. So was your request to just eliminate it from the RR1 zoning completely, or
all the RR zoning?
All the RR zoning.
If I may ask a clarifying question there. So there's the rural residential zoning. Are you speaking to all residential zoning districts or just the rural residential zoning district?
The residential. RRs.
All residential.
Yes. RR5s, RR1s.
Oh,
RR2s.
so only the RRs, because there's still suburban residential or upland residential.
Not those. The RRs. Because that tends to be where more density is.
Although if we only limit it to the RRL1s and RRL2s, then we're talking about areas that are 5 and 10 acres. Well, right.
And if I may just comment that, RR, we have RR1, 2, 5, and 10, but then suburban residential is actually a more urban type of zoning district as well, which is a...
True.
It seems like if we went with Commissioner Jones's recommendation to have it a 5-acre minimum parcel size to qualify for one, it would address the density perhaps in all.
I think 10-acre would be more realistic.
I just got to paint the picture for you guys. These things are extremely lucrative. Like Jug Handle makes $200,000 a year on camping alone. Extremely, extremely lucrative. So it has the potential to really transform a neighborhood if 5 or 6 residences in different locations add 3 or 4 campsites. You've now added 15 campsites to a neighborhood, or 20 campsites to a neighborhood, which is 2 cars and 6 people per campsite. That's a big impact. And I think I don't know, I've just run a campground. There's a lot to it. And anyway, I just think we should tread a little more carefully. I think Hip Camp is a venue where people can make a lot of money, and I get how important that is to our community. And there's a part of me that doesn't want to limit it just to rich people who have big parcels. So I can see the argument on both sides of that, but definitely RR5 would be the lowest I would go, and I think we might want to consider RR10 and see how that plays out for a few years, and if it plays out not in a bad way, then we can come back. But once these are established, once someone's got a use permit, they've got it. Like, you can't take that back.
Director Krog.
If I may, I think I can help steer this conversation a little bit. Please do. So I think for me, I really want to see like a consensus from the commission. So I think there's a couple things that we could just start off right off the bat. So hearing from Commissioner Wiedemann potentially not allowing these at all, is there a majority support for not allow? Does the majority, I guess I'll ask this, does the majority of the commission want to see regulations for low intensity camping included within a draft of the zoning code?
I guess I'm not sure what makes it low intensity if you can have up to 4 sites on any size parcel.
So maybe let me rephrase. Allow for, is there a majority of the commission that wishes to allow for camping for profit on a residential property without being classified as a campground as part of this zoning code. And if you can just show by show of hands, I think that might be helpful.
Not sure what you mean.
Should we have
clarify what you mean, please?
It's whether or not you want to see regulations to allow for commercial camping included at all in the
Residential zone.
in the code at all.
Right. But doesn't already recreational vehicle parks and campground do that? I mean, what does this do that doesn't do?
So what this doesn't do is this is not subjecting you to all of the same standards that you would get for your conventional campground under transient habitation campground facility.
Expand on that.
So there's multiple transient habitation use types. Yes. One of those is campground, which is what currently is allowed. This it requires a use permit in essentially all zoning districts. And then this proposed low intensity camping would allow for a limited number of campsites without going through that higher level of permitting review. So I think what I'm trying to gauge is if this is even a topic that is of interest to the commission to want to entertain as part of this, because if it's not, there's no point in continuing to discuss standards.
I would like to entertain it. And also, I've watched a lot of the board discussion on this, and the board's given very clear direction on this, that they want to remove barriers for this happening. So, and I'm in concurrence with that. However, I think at the Planning Commission level, it's our job to figure out how to mitigate for nuisances. And so that's really where our discussion needs to focus, is how do we accomplish that board vision? And also, folks, this is just the direction the world is going. People are doing hip camp. They're already doing it now. It's just unregulated. So if we don't have an ordinance, people are just going to keep doing it in an unregulated fashion. So I think we just need to figure out where do we want it, where is it appropriate, at what intensity, and at what permitting / business license level.
Great. So I see heads nodding. So I see a majority of saying, yes, let's entertain it,
So then
but
that
with
comes down
standards.
to where do we want it, right?
Well,
and that comes down to, for me, the zoning, very straight out. You know, I really want to protect the RR zonings from, I've already seen 2 different quasi-hip camps that were, and our local fire department's really uptight at this coming through. You know, there's issues here. So I want to make sure, how do we do it? I think if you want these hip camps, I think we have to, I think if we want to support hip camps or camps, let's move away from the word hip camp, I think we need to find the right locations in the sense of our zoning, and we need to make sure they are respect our local fire regs, and those are issues.
I definitely feel that, obviously, to what Director Krog said, we need some type of way to make sure that they're done properly and in the right areas. However, I'm wondering if, you know, a business license doesn't have a lot of like regulation or management of anything. But if your concern is the size of the parcels, would it make more sense to say any parcel larger than, say, but any parcel smaller than 5 acres would require an administrative permit regardless of the zoning?
An administrative or a use permit?
Administrative. Because there are still conditions on administrative permits for things, you know, you keep the lights out of neighboring windows, what type of facilities
And the public
are needed.
Hearing is required.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now, I think we're going to need a land use chart, a
Yeah.
zoning
Yeah.
chart. I think this is going to go back to like the cannabis thing where I can think of exceptions of actual hip camps operating right now that are in RR and are doing just fine. And I can think of exceptions where they're under 5 acres and doing just fine without nuisance and running a really good business. And I also understand that that is not always the case. So maybe it is on these more intensive uses like RR and on lots under 5 acres or 10 acres, whatever the magic number is, maybe that requires a higher level of review. However, what I would like to allow for, and I believe this is also the board direction, is to make some allowance for business license only if there's only one campsite, and we can define one campsite as 10 campers or less so that it's not, a giant event. And just give the green light to people out on big parcels who are not going to be bugging neighbors if they want to have a few people come camp over the weekend at their place. So, but again, I think we're probably looking at a chart.
And yeah, that's a different issue. To me, that's kind of a different issue. What you kind of brought two issues in, what you said. So the one campsite per parcel is different than opening it up camp, so to speak. So they're two different issues. And I happen to, I'm kind of in a more, because I am on the coast, we're much more.
We're going to have all the campsites, you guys. You aren't going to have them.
But this is
only too hot in the winter.
But this is only this only applies to the inland.
But the coast is the inland.
Well, right. Okay.
Most of the coast is inland.
All right.
So, Commissioner Jones, I agree that the coast is going to get the bulk of this.
It is.
However, I also have to tell you, this is happening inland, and I have firsthand knowledge, and it's much more economically important to people inland to start making some money on their properties and to pay TOT. Let's get some TOT out of this, folks. That would be a great thing.
I think this is a good conversation because I think that's actually right. I mean, the inland has really suffered in these the downturn of the cannabis market. Let's just, so economically they need support, and I get that. When you're in a residential area where there's much more density, it's like neighborhoods. So that's why you look at larger acreage. So I understand the zoning, and do we spot zone? It may be the right thing to look at a map and say, these are areas that make sense to have, camping available on people's property. But when you do kind of a blanket thing and you're upsetting, it's incongruent to the zoning, so to speak, and how that's the concern.
We kind of went through this with the campground in Boonville that was little tiny homes, and we voted against that, as you may recall, partly because of the animals on the livestock nearby and the bad fire egress and the single lane bridge. There were lots of reasons. So
it was in Hopland, I think, wasn't it?
Well, it was in Hopland, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yes, and I'll just clarify, the applicant actually withdrew that application. The commission didn't formally deny it.
Oh, well, we were getting ready to. We had sent direction. So I just feel like carefulness and thoughtfulness is required to do this well.
Mm-hmm. And a chart.
And a chart.
And a chart.
Yeah.
Because so for example, there's so many pages that we've reviewed.
Like we need
here.
a list of zoning districts where it would be allowed and not allowed.
Yes, we do. And
then
there
a
was
map
one,
that correlates with those zoning districts.
There was one, I think it was it mix? Was it?
Maybe we could ask staff to bring this back to our next meeting, so to speak.
I have some clarifying questions to allow me to do that.
Okay,
so
sure.
The first is, does the commission want to see a minimum parcel size for all zoning districts established? And if so, what is that minimum that you wish to see established? I've heard 5 acres, I've heard 10 acres.
I know of 2-acre parcels currently running Hip Camp, doing a bang-up, outstanding job without creating nuisance. It would make me very sad to put those people out of business. That being said, the majority of 2-acre sites might not be appropriate. So in that case, I would want to see a higher level of review for the more intensive residential zones, as well as the smaller parcels. So maybe we're at AP or use permit for that. And then the other end of the spectrum, again, would be like big ag parcels, rangeland, forest land, TPZ, anything over whatever the magic number is, 40 acres, 20 acres, whatever it is. If you're just doing one site, limited at 10 people, just a business license. Yeah. Yeah. And then also similarly, and this is also consistent with board direction, I am not supportive of requiring a use permit if you're on a private road. There is nowhere else in this zoning code that requires that. For every other instance, including cannabis cultivation, the county takes the stance that that's a civil issue and not a county issue. And so I don't know why we would want to muddy the waters on that.
I agree with you.
And Mr. Wiedemann, if you'd like to ask a question, could you unmute yourself and use your microphone?
Are these places you described on private roads right now?
No.
No. So they're off a public road?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think it would be helpful too if, as like an idea is brought up, if we see if there's support for that from a majority of the commission, so that would assist me, because I'm certainly I hear many different things, but I think for staff to be able to draft something, I need to hear if there's a majority of the commission. So what I pulled out of that was that any site under 5 acres in size would require, in a zoning chart, an administrative permit or use permit. Can I see a raise of hands if the commission, I see a thumbs up from at least 3. Okay, so that's a majority. And that will be something that we can discuss further in a zoning chart, just so that way I can begin to craft that. And then any site over 20 acres in size could have 1 campsite with just a business license. Is there majority support for that?
I think we did say something about 1 campsite limited to 10 people.
Oh, yes, limited to 10 people.
Just
Thank
because,
you.
like you were saying, 1 campsite could have 150 people depending on the campsite size. So I think limiting it to size and people.
Thank you. Okay, that was a great capture. And so I did see a majority hand raise on that. And we can still discuss. I see some that there may be more that want a higher intensity allowed on that, is what I'm seeing. And then lastly, I want to see, is there support to essentially not require any difference in permitting based upon if you're on a private road or a public road?
Can I make a caveat to that? It's not so much that I care whether it's a use permit or administrative permit. I want everybody who's on that private road to be noticed that there will be a campground and to have an opportunity to speak on the issue. So, and the advantage to a use permit is it goes in the paper so people can find out about it. An administrative permit doesn't go into the paper, so no one can find out about it.
We did put administrative permits in the newspaper for public hearings.
I still would like noticing along the length of the private road.
I wonder if then just one way that we could address that is that there is this last section E, the affidavit required that the applicant is required to notify everyone within 300 feet of the property boundary. And perhaps it could be amended to say, in addition, if that site is on a private road, they will notify all the property owners along that
It's already in there. It's under D5 access. If the site is located on a private road, all owners with access rights must be notified of the intent to operate a commercial campsite prior to issuance of a business license or other entitlement.
Oh, good.
Great.
Okay, fair.
They already followed
Thank
it.
you. I'm good with that.
Yeah.
And if I may, so then the main thing is that even with notice on a business license, there will not be a public hearing on a business license. So just to be clear on that point. So there would not be an opportunity for neighbors to be heard while they would be notified. They would not have an opportunity to be heard.
Well, but that's only,
that's clear.
that's only if there's a single campsite. Everything over 1 campsite, there will be an opportunity.
So I would like to also kind of, I think that in the chart, Julia, if staff is going to work on a chart, we need to dive a little bit more into the zoning districts, because it looks like the low intensity camping got added to most zoning districts. but no, it didn't get added to forest land. It got added to TPZ, but not forest land. I'm thinking that's an oversight. It should probably.
That is an oversight.
It should probably be in
But
forest
they already
land.
have the camps.
And then there was one place where it got added that, what was it?
Well, it's in commercial zoning.
It's in commercial, but there was like a high-intensity residential use. I'm trying to find it, but it was like, what would it be?
So
Like
low-intensity camping is included in the forest land district.
Oh, maybe I overlooked
Under
it.
C.
What page is that on?
Oh, gosh. Sorry, I was looking on my Word document. 69. Thank you.
Oh, 69?
Just want to clarify the other things
Perfect.
you were going to add is that there's a requirement that there's a person there on site.
I would like to see if there's a majority support for that from the commission. And I see thumbs up. Okay, so that would adjust that local contact person and hosting provision in D10 to instead pivot that to be on site.
I had one question here when we were talking the access. Okay, on number 5, when it says all owners with access rights must be notified. Okay, how are you going to find out who has access rights to a private road? Because let me, and this is a county council question, I believe, and because most private roads don't have easements, they have their prescriptive rights. And so when how are you going to find out?
Why don't we just have it be parcels bordering the road?
I think that would make the most sense.
Yep.
A lot of.
It's also very easy to find on
Yes,
parcel quest.
exactly.
And that's an applicant requirement?
Well, I think it should be the planning department, frankly, that does
Okay.
it. But the way it's written right now is it's the applicant has to do it.
We'll work on revising that with our language, but it is that the applicant would need to do that. So conceptually, we'd be getting from them what this list is of who was notified as part of that process. So,
but that should be
because private roads
you
have a
guys.
myriad of different setups.
That's right.
And I found the zoning district where I think we should actually remove HIP camp, R3, multifamily housing. Low-intensity camping was added to that, and I'm just having a hard time imagining an R3 district where it would be appropriate for low-impact camping. Jump in if you disagree with me, because I'm very open to discussion. I just literally can't imagine it.
I'm with you.
Well, it's, on that piece, right, so R3. I do think this is a map thing, because I hear you, your need, your district.
So I will say primarily R3 is largely located only in the very inland areas of the county and typically adjacent to areas that either have water and sewer service or have the potential for expanded water and sewer services. So, the R3, I can certainly make that note. There are a majority of the commission that supports removing R3, shown by a set of hands. I saw 2. I'm not seeing 3. Okay.
Wait, what? I didn't hear the
Sorry,
question.
to remove the allowance for low-intensity camping from R3.
Oh, yeah.
You can remove it.
Okay. Okay, there's a majority
I'm
there.
still
Are there other districts that commissioners believe they would like to see it removed from?
Well, I said mine.
So I'll ask the majority of.
We could do R5 and under. But we have, that's why we need the maps. We're being too loose.
Yeah, maybe we
blanketed.
could wait and see the list of all the
Yes.
districts where you're thinking about
Yeah.
allowing it, and
I
then
think
also
it'll
see the
self-dictate.
map
I
and
think
have
it'll
the
self-dictate.
discussion.
And I just want to make one comment on zoning districts. So we talk about RR5, RR10, but I think it's really important to know there are RR10 zoned properties that are 2 acres in
Yeah, I
size.
agree.
There are RR5 properties that are
That are
30
40
acres in
acres.
size.
Right.
So using a specific zoning district and the minimum lot size is not necessarily the best method I think talking about a minimum lot size requirement, if you're concerned about the overall size of what the property is that better pathway, which is already the direction that I've heard from the commission for anything under 5 acres to be subject to some level of discretionary review.
And nothing under 2 acres.
I had not heard that.
I thought we all agreed on that. Yep, we had.
Wait, we're not going to allow them at all in anything under 2 acres?
Right.
Is there another proposal?
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do think we should be seeing our county map, our zoning maps. I really do. I think it's helpful to see structurally on
where the zoning is located for these different. Okay.
The only reason I would say that I don't agree with not allowing anything under 2 acres is I feel like there are some specific properties that are public access, not on private road, that are along either 101 or out to Boonville that are close to maybe town, where it would be under 10 campers, if it's under 2 acres, that they can pull up and be more of an economical benefit if they just want to stay the weekend at a hip camp close to town, have walkability, something like that. That's not in a city jurisdiction, but is in the county still. So limiting under 2 acres, I think, would be not beneficial if that zoning doesn't comply.
I think the important thing to remember is that as planners, we're balancing needs of our community. And the balancing of the needs of our community are the economic benefits and then the social costs and the environmental costs to neighbors. And so while I agree, everybody would love to have camping, I think that there is an externality to that impacts neighbors in a way that a second unit does not, in that everybody is outside talking until at least 9, typically 10, sometimes 11 at night, usually with a fire. Even if the city of county doesn't allow them, I can guarantee you those are going to end up in these campsites because campers want them, and that's how you sell your campsites on Hip Camp. Having a fire ring is very important. So the impact to the neighbors is very different if you're on a 5-acre parcel than if you're on a half-acre parcel. You're just going to be very close. And I will just remind you that at night, voices travel a lot. And imagine for yourself a campsite 250 feet from your property edge. Are you happy with that?
So I totally agree that it's our job to mitigate for these nuisances, and that's where I'm thinking I would rather err on the side of a smaller parcel with a higher level of review. I think this is where the use permit comes in. It comes before us. We get to look at it and we get to condition it. And then the neighbors, I'm always sorry that this falls on the neighbors, get to keep their eyes on the conditions as a means for having that use permit withdrawn if needed, right? So that's the check and balance on the system. And so that would be my proposal on it, but certainly anything under 2 acres I think needs to go through a use permit just for exactly that reason.
So I think with the direction that I currently have from the commission, I can start drafting a table for your consideration if this matter is continued to ideally the regular meeting of the Planning Commission next week. Then we can bring that back for your consideration and have anything under 5 acres in size be addressed through either an administrative permit or use permit, and we can continue the discussion at that time about whether or not there's a prohibition on smaller parcels just across the board versus going through a discretionary review process as part of that. So if it's helpful to the commission, I'll just recap what I have so far for a zoning chart. So anything under 5 acres requires either an administrative permit or use permit, still to be determined. Over 20 acres, 1 campsite limited to 10 people with a business license. No distinction between private or public roads in terms of permitting required. A local host must be on site, and removal of the R3 zoning district from where this type of camping could be allowed. I heard a mention of commercial zoning districts. at one point. Is that something that the commission also wants to see removed from the zoning chart? I'm seeing a head shaking no. Okay. From
What do
agreed.
could you define what you're asking?
Yes, so it's whether or not low-intensity camping would be allowed in zoning districts such as the C1 or C2 zoning district, which are the commercial zoning districts.
Just to be to be clear on that, though, as I understand it, as it's written right now, is that there has to be a residential or an agricultural use
Correct.
type existing on the property. So if
Correct.
it's zoned commercial, it would still have to have one of those.
Correct.
Great. Okay. Well, in that case, I would not.
That is true for all properties.
And
Yes.
there are, I believe, plenty of commercial properties
Yes.
that I know of that have a residential use on site, and so I don't want to preclude them from this opportunity if.
Right, but we're not going to have anybody popping up tents behind Starbucks because there's no residential use type there.
Yeah.
Correct.
Or use, okay. I had one other just quick question, and this is on the operational requirements around sanitation, and it lists that a chemical toilet and hand washing station are required for all sites. I guess two questions. One is that is that in contemplating that there is a chemical toilet for each site that is on there, or that it's available to all sites that are
Available to all
Okay.
sites.
And then the other question, and this kind of goes back to the same thing we were talking about with the tiny houses, is that there are non-chemical toilet opportunities like composting toilets, and there's some that are engineered now that are utilized at a lot of events that don't use the same chemical technology that achieve the same ends of sanitation. And I'm curious if there's appetite on the board or on the commission to explore alternative wastewater treatment for this type of use.
I would not recommend that because campers are not going to be up on adding whatever things they need to add to a composting pit. I've run a campground. You need one porta potty for each 2 campsites. They fill up with shit really fast. They just do. You have less than that, you're going to have porta potties that are filled with crap, and that's disgusting. Campers also use generators all the time. A lot of campers bring generators. They like to play their music. So I think that generators should not be permissible, and music should not be permissible. I still haven't heard fire sprinklers being added. I'm also frankly concerned about campers being allowed to park on an area clear of vegetation. I think they should be parking on gravel spots, because especially in the inland areas and fire risks being what they are, and people having driven a long way with their carburetors getting very hot, it's a risk. Frankly, if you have any kind of grass, it needs to be mowed. There's a lot more to this, I think, than the commission recognizes, unfortunately. So if you're going to make it happen, you need to think about these other issues. Hopefully, they'll get rolled into the ordinance. And the other issue is it's always easy to make a pop-up site. If you have an extra guest arrive, you just pop up a site, and you have an extra 5 guests arrive. You pop up 3 more sites. So the idea that you're going to have a campground that's going to limit the number of sites to 2 because you put that in a regulation is not realistic.
I had some additional comments on page 209. Right under the chart, it says vehicles under 20 feet are permitted on all sites. I wanted to suggest that we increase that to 24, not because I'm a fan of big RVs, don't get me wrong, but because I looked up the Class B RVs, and they're typically up to 23 to 24 feet. So I think 20 is like arbitrary and like maybe not how the world actually works. I do see that we want to limit the big ones from coming in. So I would suggest either 23 or 24 feet on that.
If I may, just a comment on there. So the way that that is written right now, so vehicles under 20 feet are permitted on all sites. So that could be like little camper vans, things like that. Any larger vehicles, RVs or trailers over 20 feet are not permissible. They just require going through a discretionary permit process as that's currently written. So is the idea to increase the allowance So you wouldn't have to have a use permit for an RV or trailer?
For the small ones, for the Class B. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then also, maybe it's clear to you, but it wasn't clear to me, if you've got, say, like a Toyota pickup and you're hauling a teardrop trailer, which is one of the smallest trailers you can get, does that have to be under the 24 feet or just the trailer itself? Does the whole assembly, truck and trailer, or just trailer?
Primarily intended for trailer.
Primarily intended. Okay. It could be longer. Yeah. So we might just want to clarify, because
So I would actually like to respectfully disagree with that, because I think the impact on neighbors of having unsightly trailers is very different than camping. And trailers always come with generators, so they're always louder. They always have electricity. They're also likely going to cause more dust on a private road. Not that I care about that, but I just think asking for a use permit for actual trailers, like camping, like now we're kind of into recreational vehicle parks and campgrounds, which is a different regulation set than this. I think this is more, it's called informal camping, intensity camping.
I mean, again, I think we're just trying to balance this, and I'm just thinking about someone, by the way, I totally support a generator ban. I think we should do a generator ban, period. I'm thinking about people that I know that travel with a teardrop trailer and don't plug in, and they do the lightest possible camping. And then if there was a campsite that allowed a single trailer at a single site, I have seen those be some of the quietest, most respectful campers. And I think it makes sense to align this chart with the actual classes of trailers, right? So the Class B trailers can go up to 23 feet. Anything larger than that starts falling into RV and larger RV category.
Commissioner Wiedemann, if you'd like to ask questions,
Yes,
could
I
you please
will.
unmute and use your
Okay,
microphone?
thank you.
Thank you.
So Commissioner, the issue is, you know, it's one thing to have an individual or two individuals who you know are respectful and have the right size vehicle. The question is impacts. Once you open it up to travel trailers, right, and you could try to limit it, and you also are saying, hey, access might be up private roads. Many private roads are dirt roads or gravel roads. So my question gets back to impact to the neighborhood. And there may be a need for economic growth in areas, and I hear that, and I want to be supportive of that. But I also then we're going to have to target this tighter. That's all I'm trying to say. You can't, when you're asking for that, I mean, it's so incongruent where the neighborhoods I live in and visit and get called to as a commissioner, where you're moving, and I'm trying to find a balance, right? But that seems extreme to some of the areas I represent.
Okay. I don't feel like I'm proposing anything extreme. I'm actually supporting a generator ban. I'm saying it could be nice to align the chart with the definition of Class B RV. If the commission's not interested in that, I can totally let that go. Furthermore, I also think that we should define one camping spot not only as the 10 people, but as one trailer, so that it's not one campsite with 2 trailers or 3 trailers or 5 trailers. So I actually feel like I'm kind of clamping down on it a little bit, if anything. So And if we don't want to align the chart with the Class B definition for RV, totally fine with me.
And if I may, through the chair, I think just in the interest of sort of like time too, because I know some commissioners have time constraints, I've gotten some good direction here, and then I think to work on a revised chart and bring back some of these, just the discussion items that we've heard here. But then ultimately too, if the commission believes that additional workshopping needs to happen on regulations related to this, it's completely acceptable to pull this out of the current draft right now and bring this back as a separate regulation and just a discussion specifically surrounding these regulations in and of themselves. So knowing that that option is always on the table, not trying to rush you into making decisions, and if this needs to be workshopped further, then let's do that workshopping, and we can bring that back as a separate ordinance amendment at a future time. So my suggestion would be for the commission that staff's receive direction on this at this time, and we can move on to maybe another chapter
I think
after hearing some public comment.
I think it would be great just to, because Cliff and I both did a little Googling, a Class B, a Sprinter van is longer than 20 feet. And so I think, like Allison said, just aligning it with a Class B might be
So
helpful.
I'm fine with just changing it to anything over 24 feet would require a use permit. Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah.
Oh, didn't realize that was what you were asking for.
Yeah.
I thought you meant any size trailer could happen.
No, definitely not.
I'm good with that.
Definitely not. I have one more thing that I'd like to make a recommendation on, and that is some specific language for consideration under operational requirements D1, sanitation. San Benito County just adopted their camping ordinance, their low-intensity camping ordinance, and their language reads, property owners shall maintain sanitation facilities that are fully self-contained or connected to a permitted sewage disposal system serving the property. I feel like that could meet environmental health requirements while being slightly more open-ended, maybe for more creative situations. And then Santa Cruz County says sanitation facilities such as portable toilets or connected to a permitted sewage disposal system that meets all regulations and requirements of environmental health. So I like both of those languages slightly better than what
Great. I'd like to open this up to the public on this particular topic unless there's any other comments. Okay.
I'm exhausted.
Members of the public standing patiently.
Right. Good morning. John Haschak, 3rd District Supervisor. Thank you, Commissioners, for both the discussions this morning about this low-intensity camping and the tiny homes. Then it's just amazing how much you know and your expertise on these issues. I'm being supervisor for an inland area that this low-intensity camping is very important for economic development and kind of diversifying income. Some of these issues that we're dealing with fire, with guns, with partying, all those kind of issues, I'm glad you're dealing with them. Very important. I think that the Farm Bureau had also some good points in their memo. And also the other issue that I've talked to Director Krog about is the Williamson Act. And how do we get some of these, like make it a compatible use, the low intensity camping being a compatible use in Williamson Act. I think the timing is we're looking forward to moving after this is approved, some point then dealing with that issue, because I'm on the Great Redwood Trail Agency, and that's part of the plan is to allow this low intensity camping along the trail. And so a lot of those properties are in the Williamson Act. So that will be a critical issue moving forward too. But thank you for working on these, and I need to be in Willits by noon. So.
You better go.
So, wow.
So right fast.
Got your helicopter all fueled up out there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor.
Good morning. Hi. I had a couple concerns that I was going
Could
to
you
bring to you.
state your name for the record, even though most of us know who you are?
Greg Nelson.
Thank you, Greg.
Our property is located south of Ukiah at the end of the freeway, and we've been doing low-intensity camping since COVID. The third issue that came up today was generators. And I would like to speak in favor of allowing generators. In our case, we don't allow generators past 10 o'clock. And I don't have to remind you, it's been over 100, several days now. And the battery for your air conditioning doesn't last that long. And so generators are very important when you have this kind of heat. So I would like to thank you for your service. I know you don't do it for the big check, and you put a lot of hours in as well. So I appreciate that. I want to emphasize the importance of RV camping for us. It was a godsend for us during COVID when so many people weren't traveling. It really saved our bacon at the tasting room. It encourages visitors to stop at the tasting room, and it still does. It is low cost, low impact source of income that supplements our agricultural business. It is especially helpful during these lean economic times that at least the vineyard industry is starting to go into at this point. The two issues that I wanted to bring up was that I was hoping there would be some flexibility with the RV length. I don't know who's going to police it. I do see where it, depending on the situation, it may be an issue. I thought perhaps it was a concern about roads. In our case, access is right off of US 101. The road to the campsite, which is up on top of the ridge, was put in by AT&T, and there's about a foot of quarter or 4-inch rock when they were bringing cement trucks up to put the antenna. So if it's a road issue, at least it wouldn't be an issue for us. So we would like to see less prejudice against larger RVs. In our situation, there are 6 campsites, 1 campground, 6 campsites on 380 acres. Our sites are between 200 and 500 feet apart, and the nearest neighbor is 1,200 feet away. So you can see that generators wouldn't really be an issue. And then the other issue that I wanted to bring up was chemical toilets. We only allow self-contained RVs. There's no tent camping. And so we don't really have any, the toilets wouldn't be used because everybody is self-contained. So I would hope there'd be some flexibility on that as well. So agritourism is an important part of our operation. In addition to the strawberries and the Christmas trees, we do concerts and weddings, and sometimes we'll have 15 RVs coming to our concerts. So that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you.
All right. Any other members of the public wishing to speak on this topic?
I have 5 people on Zoom with their hand raised.
All right.
I'm going to begin with Amy Wynn.
Okay. All right. Ms. Wynn, go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Amy Wynn with Wynn Coastal Planning and Biology. Such a treat seeing former Commissioner Nelson, but definitely been in that room a number of times with him in your seats. So I definitely understand and appreciate everyone's concerns. And I support the commentary, the line of commentary that Commissioner Purnell presents. And I do support the revisions that Director Krog has been crafting. Those seem to make sense, especially with a higher level of review for smaller parcels. Property owners are already doing this because there's a demand for it. And I believe that there is space to allow for some of these uses given some guidelines, some strong guidelines. As a cyclist, mountain biker, the klutzy one, I have a lot of friends that do like to accommodate people on their property, generally one or two couples on their property. There are people that do the touring cycling along the highways that like to know that there's a place for them to stay overnight somewhere. These folks generally don't have generators. I understand the noise concerns. One thing I'm thinking about, or a couple of things. One, campground is very different from the low intensity camping. So I think it's important for people, potential users to remember, if you want to do a campground that's a use permit, this is really intended for very low intensity type camping. It would allow for someone to live on the property, whereas right now, at least in the coastal zone, if you have a vacation home rental, and I know this is not coastal, if you have a vacation home rental, it has to be the whole parcel. What this would allow, if this were to come into the coastal zone, but what this allows is for there to be a resident on site. And I think when there's small density, low density, like 1 or 2 tents with 2 to 4 people, perhaps we might not want to have those campsites be that far away, because the closer the resident is to the camping, the more there's going to be self-policing on site. It tends to be a little bit quieter. When we've had our friends come camp on our property, everybody's quiet. They might roll up late, but they're going to roll up quietly because they don't want to disturb us because they're close to the house. So I think one thing, yeah, actually, I think I covered everything. I look forward to seeing a land use chart that illustrates where this could be used and not. But again, a campground is very qualitatively different than a low intensity camping. So I see some uses, and I would like to see this come back and see a land use chart and really think more deeply about this. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Who's next?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Hi, my name's Jasmine. I'm the new executive director of the Mendocino County Farm Bureau. Commissioners, Chair Paul, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm not sure if you guys had the chance to read over our comment letter, but I wanted to highlight some things regarding this low intensity camping. I do want to preface by saying that our membership doesn't have a very united viewpoint on the implementation of camping. As Mr. Nelson said, the opportunities were important during COVID, and it's generated a lot of revenue, whether it be just for camping itself or, attracting them to the wine tasting rooms. But with that being said, there is a lot of concern amongst the agriculture community about the risks, and we recognize the concerns regarding the fire risks that were acknowledged with the banning of open flames at the campsites. But there's still a bit of apprehensiveness around the problems with, fire liability, insurance availability, emergency services, littering, etc. Another thing we wanted to note was, for ag operations, more specific concerns are regarding ensuring camping locations and facilities are set back from property lines, and how setbacks will be verified to ensure that adequate space is provided for potential conflicts with non-agricultural use. And we support agritourism and the ability for our members to diversify their income, but it's critical that low intensity camping doesn't become a primary use of these lands. And it doesn't impact the adjoining land uses. We also think it's important to consider how campers will be informed where they're staying, and how the agricultural property will obviously create dust and noise and other farm-related activities. Another question that we have were, will the county right to farm ordinance protect the farmer operations if campers are on adjoining properties, if they complain about noise and dust, etc.? We also wanted to emphasize what Supervisor Haschek said about the Williamson Act, and currently camping isn't allowed on the properties within the Williamson Act, but it's important to ensure that the compliance verification be performed. And we do want to mention that regular compliance verification of the Williamson Act requirements have been lacking in Mendocino County for a while. And this lack is extremely concerning to non-agricultural uses such as low-intensity camping, as they're being considered to be allowable on the Williamson properties. And the primary purpose of this contract is to preserve production agriculture, and all other uses should be subsidiary. Ensuring compliance with the Williamson Act goal is essential to maintaining the integrity of ag lands. So all in all, we don't really want to see ag lands converted into non-agricultural uses such as the campgrounds. And this has been issues in the past where outside interests wanted to purchase entire properties, ag lands, for camping purposes. And obviously we were against that proposal. But all in all, we think that the commission should be cautious with the continuation of this, as it could lead to consequences and conversion issues for agricultural properties in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Randall. Cassandra?
Hi, can you hear me?
Can.
Great. Hi there. My name is Cassandra Pren-Vasilakis. I support the Government and Community Relations team at HipCamp. Thank you, Chair Paulin and Planning Commissioners, for the opportunity to share comments and feedback on this item. We really appreciate the county's attention to the benefits and the impacts of rural recreation, and are grateful for the thoughtful conversations that have taken place both on this commission and on the Board of Supervisors to date. Thank you also to Planning and Building Services for your work on this proposal. We partner with landowners in all 50 states and across 4 countries to open access to private lands for public recreation, and our work is really focused on increasing access to the outdoors and on enabling private landowners to participate in and benefit from their local recreation and tourism economies. In Mendocino County, we're proud to work with a small community of landowners, from farmers and ranchers to rural residents and small business owners, who are invested in seeing the county support small-scale incidental recreational uses on private property where appropriate. We've connected with residents on this topic, many of whom have long been welcoming visitors to their properties and for whom hosting a small number of campers is a critical source of revenue. We do have feedback on a few sections of the ordinance. We're generally supportive of the draft language before the commission today, and I did write more feedback in a written letter to the commission. I have a lot of notes from the conversation today, so thank you all for sharing your thoughtful feedback and for your work on this topic. I think we're really mindful of what will be the right fit for these activities in this specific community. I agree with a lot of the comments and recommendations shared here today, including Commissioner Jones, your feedback on limiting the number of people, both per site and total on the property, and on requiring supervision. There are other counties that limit sites to 6 campers and have a total cap on the number of campers that can be accommodated at each site, depending on the property size. I will note that Mendocino already allows up to 10 RVs and up to 30 non-paying guests on private property in the county. And I'm not sure what the origin of that is, but I think really helpful to, when you're allowing a paid use and allowing the collection of TOT, consider that those uses don't enable the county to use revenues to invest in the shared infrastructure that they're dependent on. For acreage minimums, we're really supportive of setback requirements, of additional review and other safeguards to make sure these activities are happening where appropriate. I will comment that we work with landowners on smaller parcels and also work closely with small and non-traditional farmers who really stand to benefit from policies like this one. So would love to continue the conversation around additional review to make sure that they're not excluded and that they're able to benefit. To the comments about potential conflicts with agriculture, I'll just share that Santa Barbara's done a lot of work on this in their agricultural enterprise ordinance, and that may be relevant to this conversation. We fully agree that camping shouldn't become the primary use on agricultural parcels. The goal really is to keep farming economically viable, as well as to connect the public with their local food systems through camping and agritourism. I did share feedback on the sanitation section. I heard a comment earlier today about loving composting toilets. I really do too. So shared some examples from other jurisdictions. There are a number of counties that have their own iterations of this ordinance, and composting toilets can be a great option. On permitting and costs, we're broadly supportive of the tiered permitting process. It gives landowners an affordable entry point into hosting campers and also gives them flexibility. So you don't have to start out with a significant financial investment right off the bat. You can see if it's a fit for you on your property, on your farm, and grow from there. But we think the flexibility there is particularly important for farmers and ranchers, for whom camping-based agritourism is a low-cost way to diversify income while keeping land in agricultural production. So I have many more notes from this conversation. Would welcome continued conversations with the county and with the commission. Really appreciate the opportunity to share these ideas and are happy to continue to partner with this group throughout the process. So please let me know how we can be helpful, and thank you again for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you very much. Kathy and Bill.
Hello, my name is Kathy Brown. Thank you for letting the public make comment on this issue. I greatly appreciate it. I've been a resident of Mendocino County for 30 years as a public school teacher as well. My husband and I own Williamson Act property. We're an off-grid homestead, and we are a micro farm with CCOF organic certification. Ag tourism is really helping us to become financially stable, as we have been struggling with debt since COVID. And like the previous gentleman who is a low use permit camp host, I started during COVID as well. We have 160 acres and 2 campsites. They never see each other. One campsite is completely dry, and so it's self-contained, just like the other gentleman's, where trailers and vans can camp with overnight. It's just basically a place to rest your head overnight. That's affordable for people who are traveling on the road. And so a couple of points that were brought up about low intensity camping. One that I take very seriously is fire safety. And as a private landowner, we have to be very strictly fire regulated for maintaining our insurance. And so we've done a lot of mitigation in our forests, and we are very responsible with our guests. We even provide the California State Fire pamphlet for our guests to use for extinguishing their fires. If the other thing is that Hip Camp sends out fire ban notices. They're very serious about fire safety as well. And so when those notices come out, we also enact a fire ban. We also enact fire bans if there is any wind present. So if there's a wind present, they're not allowed to have a fire. And we only allow fire at one site, and that's the site that we have running water at, and a pond. So our site is here for educating people about homesteading and nature. And so we have a hiking map, and we're very educational.
Chris?
About it.
Excuse me.
The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the number of sites.
Ms. Brown, can you hear me?
We have.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
I'm sorry, your time has elapsed. Thank you so much for your comments. All right, who is next?
Hey guys, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Nat.
Oh, this is so exciting. Okay, so my name is Nathaniel Buttrick. I live out on the coast, and I have a property that's on Kamshukai Road. It's not in the coastal zone, and it's an RR 10-acre parcel. I've been waiting for this conversation, and I'm really delighted you guys are having it. I had a cultivation license out there that I decided to let go of. So the county did allow me to have 10,000 square feet of cultivation. I went through the process to get a 5,500 square foot building built. I did a conditional use permit that I was going to grow indoor cannabis, and the county allowed me to do that too. I never built the building because the universe didn't want it to happen. I called and talked to Mark Kleiser about the camping situation, and I was told that I was able to build a hotel or some small hotel there, but I wasn't able to do the campsites. So this is exciting. So right now I have an RR 10-acre parcel. I don't have cannabis. I don't have a big indoor grow. I have a small food farm, and I have 4 sites. I've been running this for 2 years now, and it's been amazing because it's allowed me to keep up with the overhead of the property. We charge $60 a night. And as you guys know, people come in, they pay $60 and they spend the rest of their money in the town of Mendocino, which is awesome for us and our economy. My children are 4th generation Mendocino. I'd love for them to have the opportunity to be able to stay here for the long term. Obviously, they don't have the money to build a hotel and all that stuff. As far as the bathrooms go, I have I have 1 bathroom per 2 sites. I only have 4 sites, so that's 2 bathrooms. As far as the fire pit goes, I have 1 central fire location. Even though people would like to have a fire at each of their campsites, I don't allow that. I have 1 central fire zone that is on a massive brick patio with fire suppression all around it, and I turn it off when we get closer to having issues in the fire season. So just one site or 1 zone, and that allows people to come together. I've had hundreds of people stay at this property. I've never had any negative reviews. I've only had people have an amazing time. They're so grateful for being able to come into Mendocino and pay $60 and experience our community. I've never had any issues from my neighbors. I've had hundreds of people. I've never had any issues with my neighbors. I have 187 positive reviews, and I am eager to start to give the money, like so many of my peers, TOT tax to the county. Without the ability to get a business license, I don't have that TOT number. I need that TOT number. It's very, very important. There's a barrier for us to be able to actually pay transient occupancy tax without that number. I could just send money into the county in an envelope and not say anything, but I don't know how to do this without the TOT number. As far as generators, music, things like that go, I totally understand. I think it's case by case. I do appreciate the reality of it being 100 degrees out, needing AC, things like that. And I think everything I've heard is awesome. I'm just delighted this conversation is being had, and I love it. So I think that's all I really wanted to say. Give thanks and good luck with this as it comes together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buttrick. Do we have anyone else on the line?
That is it for public comment on Zoom.
Okay. Commissioner Babini, you said you had a comment about.
I did, and I believe was with the comment for the 10 allowable RVs on public or on private property. I wasn't sure if that had limitation of days in a year, or zoning requirements, whether private property is privately owned commercial property, privately owned residential property, what potential limitations are on that made that different than what we're looking at here.
Sure, Julia Krog, Planning and Building Services Director. It's underneath the temporary use regulations in the county code right now, 20.168035. It's the use of property by owner or non-paying guests. So that's very key. This is not for compensation or profit. It is permitted in the RR, UR, AG, FL, RL, and TP zoning districts. And it does say temporary camping, not to exceed 60 days in any 6-month period, intensity, not more than 30 individuals or more than 10 tents or RVs may be on a site at any one time, and talks about that they cannot be connected to water, gas, or electricity, and when not in use, removed from the site. And then there is an exclusion mentioning camping utilizing 10 or less tents or RVs for 14 days or less in any 6-month period is exempt from the provisions of this section.
So to me, that sounds like I'm having a wedding at my property and I want to have my family stay here for 3 days. That seems like that fits more into that than it does into what we're talking about here, than a paying guest or a hip camp.
I don't know, Commissioner Purnell, do you have other?
I just had
Final
one more quick comment following public comment. In light of what Greg Nelson said, I wanted to revise a statement that I made previously about generators. I was thinking about generators with tent camping. I wasn't thinking about RVs when it's over 100 degrees out, and in certain settings, I could see how it would be quite important, including to his operations and others like his. I wanted to present this to the commission for consideration, that generator use could somehow show up on our chart for review on bigger parcels with setbacks, maybe use permit related, some kind of review and buffer so that it is not a nuisance.
If I may, in the draft regulations under D8, electricity, it says electrical service, including generators, is prohibited unless approved as part of a use permit.
Perfect. Done.
All right. Any other comments on low intensity camping? Wow, it's a lot more intense than. Okay. All right.
We do have Kathy and Bill Brown raise their hand again.
Oh.
I don't know if you want to let them speak again.
Have they?
What I would suggest is, since the speaker already spoke, if they have additional comments, those can always be submitted in writing as
Yes.
well to the commission. And
we'll be workshopping this one, it sounds like. Okay, great. All right. Does anyone need a bio break before we?
That would be next week, just to be clear.
Yes.
Not later this meeting. Okay.
Right, yes. Does anyone need a bio break during this meeting? Okay, great. Moving on, I think the next one I had on my list was looking at employee housing.
Well, that one will actually be, I think, actually a relatively brief topic. I was going to suggest that maybe we look at ADUs and junior ADUs,
Let's do it.
and then come back to the employee housing.
Can you get a page on that one again, too? I have so many.
Director Krog, is there a good page number in the packet to direct?
Yes, sorry, just one moment. Yes, 187.
Thank you.
So just giving the brief overview again, the accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units are still permitted as accessory uses to residential and agricultural use types in 20.164. This chapter, the proposed chapter 20.166, moves the standards over to this standalone chapter as opposed to having it all within the accessory use regulations, making the accessory use regulation chapter a little bit cleaner too, and then really having a section that staff can review to work through what may be required or the standards that need to be applied to various accessory dwelling units. Now I'll note that Commissioner Jones did submit a letter that was sent to the commissioners. It's posted online as well regarding accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. And staff did review that, and there are some additions or changes. I don't know if you want to walk through that memo from Commissioner Jones, or if there's specific items that the commission would want to speak to before that. But that could be a good starting place.
I would like it if Commissioner Jones would do just like a summary of the memo. I think that'd be helpful.
I think you're muted still.
I just unmuted myself instead of.
Great.
Anyway, so ADU law is very heavily regulated by the state of California. So there are certain things that are absolutely required to be in the ordinance. And when I reviewed this ordinance, I saw that the county's consultant obviously didn't read the most recent law. I don't know. But the ordinance that I got through the city of Fort Bragg was reviewed by HCD and was found to be complete. So that should give you some confidence that I at least know what I'm talking about. So what I've done is I've pretty much highlighted things, and I have to admit that I didn't get this until late last night, so I emailed it to James at 7:30. Sorry about that. So I'm not sure that it's 100% perfect. And in fact, I found, for example, on underneath condominiums. So there are certain things that have to be in the ordinance. And I know the county probably doesn't have very many condominiums, but if you did, you'd have to do this. And then one other thing that I missed was item number A, conversion of accessory structures to ADUs. So state law does require that if you have an existing accessory structure, it can be 3,000 square feet. You have to be allowed to convert that 3,000 square feet into an ADU. So it sort of gets you way past the ADU size limit. And so I think it's very important that that be included. Timing, this is one of the issues that I had with the coastal zone ADU ordinance. An ADU should be allowed to be constructed before or after the primary unit, and that's not spelled out in this ordinance, and I think it should be. Let me give you a for instance. Let's say you have a property and you have an 800 square foot unit on it already. Why can't that be the ADU? Instead of you having to build yet another small unit, you should be able to build a 3,000 square foot unit in addition if you want to. And the way the ordinance for the coastal zone is written, you cannot do that right now. Sales of ADUs are allowed or not allowed as a tenants in common unless it's by a nonprofit agency. Short-term rentals are prohibited in ADUs, so that needs to be in the ordinance. They have to be deed restricted. There is a requirement in this ordinance that's no longer allowed. Owner occupancy is no longer allowed in an ordinance if you have ADUs or junior ADUs. So that's item 8 on page 190 that would need to be struck. There is an exception that even if your parcel is so small, you have to relax the zoning standards in order to allow at least an 800 square foot ADU. So that would need to be added, admittedly not likely in the county, but you might run into that at some point. The setbacks you have, again, a reduced front setback is required if you cannot accommodate at least one 800 square foot ADU. So that's another thing that got missed. The ADU has to have a separate entrance, and that's not spelled out. ADUs can be also located in the attached garage. They don't just need to be located within the walls of the house, so that needs to be spelled out. Again, separate entrance required for a JADU. JADUs weirdly do not have to have bathrooms. I don't get that, but whatever. So solar requirements. ADUs are not subject to solar requirements unless it's associated with a new detached unit. They're exempt from paying capacity fees. I don't know if this comes into play, but it might if you have sewer systems or sewer districts. Those districts can't charge connection fees or capacity fees. They can charge connection fees. Really important thing, no correction of non-conforming zoning conditions is allowed when you're permitting an ADU. So you might have a non-conforming structure on your parcel. The county can't make you tear down that non-conforming structure in order to establish the ADU. So you're allowed to continue non-conforming issues on your parcel.
And turn it
or not. Or just leave it a non-conforming whatever it might be. Yes.
I wonder if that applies to, sorry, so if a non-conforming residence is on a commercial property, and then they granted an ADU that's expanding upon that non-conforming use, because typically you can have an ADU as an accessory to a residential use, but if it's non-conforming, are you saying they can still have an ADU?
So that's something that we could decide to do. That's not spelled out in law.
Okay.
So in law, they're really only looking at junior ADUs and ADUs in single-family residential districts. Or if you have a multifamily development, you're allowed to put 2 ADUs on that parcel that already has a multifamily development. You're also allowed to convert all unoccupied space in that multifamily development, such as storage space or whatever, into ADUs, so long as it doesn't exceed 25% of the total number of units on the parcel. I know that by heart. This is how much I've delved into this crap. And then also restrictive covenants are void for ADUs. So if you have a covenant in a district that says you can't have an ADU, doesn't matter. So I think all of that stuff needs to get added. And then again, like I said before, other than that, I think the ordinance looks great. I would just take out that owner occupancy requirement, which is no longer allowed by law.
Director Quirk, there's a lot in there.
Well, I
Give you
have
a
gone
moment.
through it, so I'm ready to respond.
And again, I did it late last night, so I might have missed
No, and
something.
so there are some revisions that I'll bring back at a subsequent meeting here with red lines, because some of these changes do need to be incorporated, but I do want to walk through some just to direct the commission to where those are. So we do already have the language on ministerial approval. We will add language on the deemed approved component, and I'm just going to walk through from top to bottom in the memo from Commissioner Jones. Then for the condominiums, that language is included under 20.166030A. Although it was a little unclear to myself about the rented component. So if Commissioner Jones, if you have a government code section reference for that, I would be very interested to see. Then mainly I focused on the yellow highlighted, just to be clear. Yes, so then underneath sale of ADUs and JADUs, that'll be an added section that will include. Underneath the short-term rentals prohibited, what we saw under Government Code Section 66323 is that really applies to very specific types of ADUs or junior ADUs and not necessarily all ADUs or junior ADUs. So that's something we'll have to do a little bit of work on to bring back to for the Commission's consideration. So that's something we'll come back on.
Wait, can you give me that code section again?
66323 of Government Code.
And so, Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski, I'll note that the legislature very helpfully recodified all ADU statutes this last March. They have been crammed into one or two sections in a weird spot in the Government Code anyway. But I wasn't aware of this until I was looking at section references this morning either. So section references have been updated. I'm not sure. I don't think how many of them are substantive, but that was a fun fact from the California legislature.
And then in terms of the deed restriction and reviewing Government Code, it looks like what we've seen is primarily this is for junior ADUs, and that's the language that we do have within the code right now for junior ADUs, but we'll continue to look at that as well. We would, for the second unit standards exceptions to accommodate at least 800 square feet, we'll add language regarding that for particularly front yard setbacks. I think we don't really have any other objective development standards that would come into play for that other than the front yard setback. So we'll include that language. And then similarly, so for the separate entrance required, that is included under 20.166035A5 within the draft regulations, which says an attached accessory dwelling unit shall have direct exterior access separate from the main entrance to the primary dwelling, and similar language is included for junior ADUs as well. And then, let's see here, location for junior ADUs being allowed within an attached garage. I think a very simple clarifying couple words can be added regarding that location to address that item. Though we have as a department, we understand that that is allowable. So attached garages, we have allowed junior ADUs in those already as it is, but we can clarify that in the regulation. And then in terms of maximum floor area, that 500 square feet is contained within the draft regulations and the separate entrance required. Efficiency kitchen is included in 20.166035C5.
Can I ask a quick question about the efficiency kitchen? Yes. I'm not seeing it in here, but as I recall reading somewhere in the packet, it said that in an efficiency kitchen, the burners can only be electric. You're not allowed to use natural gas or propane. Did I? Oh, is that okay? No. So.
I think the thing is that it shall include an efficiency kitchen, not that that's the only kind of kitchen you have.
At minimum, it has to have an efficiency
minimum,
kitchen.
It needs to have an efficiency kitchen.
You could have more.
A fancy kitchen.
Okay, so you could have a gas range in it.
So maybe we should add shall include at minimum an efficiency kitchen.
Sure.
Just to clarify.
So I think that gets us all the way down to the solar requirements. And so we have not added solar requirements in here because that's regulated through the California Building Code. So didn't feel that that needed to be included in the zoning regulation. Capacity fees, there are no capacity fees that Planning and Building Services collect. So while we understand that restriction is there, I don't think that it has to be within the zoning regulations because it's really regulating how special districts may have hookups happen to them because the county doesn't, have any centralized water and sewer that we're responsible for. And then for off-site improvements and the correction of non-conforming zoning conditions, We're going to add some language regarding that, just to be clear, although I will say our code as it is right now, we don't require any off-site improvements as part of it. There's no sidewalk standards, things like that underneath our zoning code as it is. So
haven't you required in the past, like stormwater improvements?
Typically
and
that's
things like
done
that?
through the Department of Transportation on discretionary permit reviews. And since these are all ministerial, it wouldn't
wouldn't
necessarily, yeah.
Got it. Fair.
And then non-conforming ADUs, if the commission would like this to be added, it can be. We already do perform our code enforcement investigations in compliance with health and safety codes, so we're aware of this provision, and it can be included or not, but we already do follow those provisions for the delay in enforcement. And then restricted covenants, our office, we really try to shy away from providing legal advice to any sort of applicants. So while this, the restrictive covenants being void is something included in the regulation, really, and we would not be telling an applicant that. They would need to be consulting with legal counsel on how they may pursue that with, if there's a CC&R or something applicable to the property, since it's really a civil matter.
Well, thank you guys for entertaining me, and I'm sorry I did it so late, but I had to get through the whole rest of the document. And I will just say that when I look at this short-term rental thing, it says a local agency shall require that a rental of the accessory dwelling unit created pursuant to this section be for a term longer than 30 days, which to me means anyway, thank you. I appreciate it.
Commissioner Babini?
I had a question about the conversion of accessory structures to ADUs, because you do know much more about this topic than I do. I wasn't sure if this was or was not a state law, because I guess there was some confusion for me about, so if you had, say, a 20,000 square foot metal barn that you wanted to convert to an ADU, you'd be able to do that then under this language of the conversion of an accessory structure to?
Yeah, I would say under the strict application of the language, of course, there's an issue of whether a metal barn would comply with Uniform Building Code.
Well, that's why,
I
conversion.
think if you had like a more realistic, like 300 square foot barn, then yes, you would need to be able to accommodate an ADU within that structure. And if it's a pre-existing structure that's non-conforming, those non-conformances get to continue. So it might be like too close to the property line or too tall or whatever. You can't make the person rebuild the structure in order to comply with the zone.
Okay. The only reason I asked that is because I have this specific building in mind that I know somebody had wanted to do this to, and it was massive. And so their idea was, we're only going to have one bedroom. We're just going to have this big, huge open space living room. And so I guess that was my wondering, is if they converted it to a conditioned space, usable, meets all the building codes, if then, they could say have a 20,000 square foot ADU and a 1,500 square foot home.
If it's an existing structure. And so one of the things that our planning commission added to that is the clarification that that structure had to be existing before the adoption of the ordinance, because what you don't want to have happen is people just building any old barn and then coming in 2 years later and converting it into a very large second unit on the property, which of course in the county is not as big a deal because you're allowed to have 2 large residential units.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate the clarification.
And I will also just note as part of this, and I'm assuming that you all picked up on that in there too, we receive a lot of complaints about the size limitations on accessory dwelling units. And so one thing that we've added into this proposed ordinance is to bring back second residential units as well. So that way, if somebody does not want the sort of incentives or reduced standards that you may get with building an accessory dwelling unit, you could build a second residential unit in lieu of that, and the size that you would like it to be, and meeting all the standard zoning requirements. So it may address also this concern about conversion of accessory structures as well.
So you're changing, the second resident in the county got limited. It used to be whatever size you wanted, and somewhere in the process it got limited. Was it 1,400 square feet?
1,200
square feet.
What?
So now we're getting rid of that, or we're proposing to get rid of that
We're
and leave it
still
open.
maintaining, so that way we're compliant, so units that are meeting those accessory dwelling unit standards get those reduced setbacks, the parking exceptions, all of those criteria. But then also for like larger acreage properties where maybe they don't necessarily need or want those benefits, they could build a larger second residential unit as well. So just trying to, again, provide that diversity of housing options so that it's not limited. And when we did adopt ADU regulations in 2018, we replaced the second residential unit regulations with the ADU regulations, thereby limiting the square footage to 1,200 square feet. So.
And now we're bumping it to 1,500, correct?
Yes, so, but in reviewing in very thorough detail some of the government code sections earlier today, our suggestion will likely be to return that back to 1,200 square feet, just to avoid the way that government code is written. It says it shall not exceed 1,200 square feet. So it's interesting, you know, oftentimes you can be more sort of flexible, because usually they would put like limitations on what a local government can, so you couldn't prohibit certain sizes, but in this case they actually put a cap on it. So that's a revision that we'll be making to bring back in front of the commission. But again, if larger than 1,200 square feet, you can do it as a second residential
so 1,200
unit.
or under is an ADU.
Yep.
Anything over that is second residence.
Exactly.
That's great.
I think Sonoma County had the same idea to be like, well, maybe we'll do ADUs up to 2,000, but I want to say they found that same shall not and brought it back down to 1,200.
So I'd like to make one other suggestion that's not in my memo that I tried to get Fort Bragg to go for, but they didn't, and that is allowing duplexes. So just because, you know, people might have duplexes, they might want to legalize, for example, and can't, the way the code is currently written, and do we really care if there's 2 residential units that are allowed on a property if they're connected or not?
Well,
doesn't seem like we care.
Quite frankly, that could possibly be done through a second residential unit. They can be attached or detached.
Oh, they can be attached or detached. Great.
Mm-hmm. So I think we have addressed that.
Okay.
Yay.
I have a question in the same theme here. At the bottom of page 188, where they're talking about the number of ADUs and JDUs on lots or parcels which allow single-family homes, under B, it says, in addition to an ADU or second residential unit, 1 junior ADU shall be allowed on a parcel. Do you know what this means for, but an ADU, correct me if I'm wrong, is in lieu of guest cottage, correct?
Sorry, I was muted.
I'm curious about how the count happens with guest cottages and detached bedrooms.
Absolutely. So detached bedrooms and guest cottages, there's actually, what we've done with this is removing those limitations in terms of not being allowed to have an accessory dwelling unit or a second residential unit if you have those combinations of accessory structures, the guest cottage or the detached bedroom, because really it was an order of operations issue, because you could still, through the code, build your maximum number of units under there, just depending on what order you constructed those units with, how it was previously written. So we just said, let's get rid of that restriction. There's not really any reason that we need to have it. There are still limitations on the number of guest cottages, 1 per property, 2 detached bedrooms. Those are unchanging. But in terms of full dwelling units, the maximum that somebody could have on their property underneath these ADU regulations or second residential units is a primary residence, either a ADU or a second residential unit, and a junior accessory dwelling unit.
So no
Well,
guest
not a
houses
full-blown
with that?
residence.
No, you can have a guest house as
Okay.
well. A guest house isn't considered a residential unit.
Sorry,
Well,
what I was
that's-
saying is that it doesn't, what is being proposed does not change the allowances that currently exist for guest cottages or detached bedrooms.
Okay, I want to make sure I understood it correctly. So you could have a primary with an ADU and a JDU, and a guest cottage and a detached bedroom?
Correct.
Okay.
Family compound.
I just have a couple more quick, maybe only one more thing on here. Under development standards, number 3, setbacks. I just noticed that the setbacks are 4 feet, whereas in the setbacks section for storage buildings, patios, and all that, it's 5 feet. And
4 feet's required by the state.
so I was going to say, I think we should bring those into alignment. So this comment might actually belong in the other section, but I think that we should bring them into alignment, and if 4 is required by state for the others. I'll bring it up again when we get to the other section on setbacks.
Like 5 feet. I could be wrong.
I had one quick question, and again, this is probably mandated by state, but this is in the required parking section, the last section D, that basically said that if there's on-site parking that's lost through the conversion of a garage or a carport or covered parking structure, that there's not a requirement for replacing that.
That's in state law.
Okay. Have some crowded streets out there in the future.
Well,
They
and
want people in homes.
Yeah.
And I think, certainly that's probably more applicable in urban areas. In our rural area, generally there's usually space for parking to happen, but.
Yeah, although, I mean, there's some fairly dense parts of the greater Ukiah area that are unincorporated that parking is tight as it is.
A little caveat to the parking, when all this stuff was coming out with the state, it was very clear, let's say in the city of Berkeley and Oakland, they let go of the parking, which a lot of planners were saying, why are we allowing more build out? We need the build out for housing, but what about the parking? And they basically said, we're going to force them to go into public transit, right? That's the move.
And walkable community.
Yes, and walkable community.
Which works when you have public transit and walkable communities.
But not so much
I'll
here.
note.
Yeah, no, I know. But it's not.
All right. Do we feel complete for now on ADUs?
And thank you,
Deputy
Commissioner
County- Oh, yeah,
Jones.
public comment. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Jones, for your work on the memo.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't have it all right.
I appreciate the calling to attention to it now so we can get that cleaned up too. So thank you.
I'd like to invite public comment on this particular topic, if there is any. Anybody on Zoom?
No one on Zoom with their hand raised.
Okay, great. So we have about 20 minutes until a couple commissioners need to depart. I guess I just want to
If I may,
commission.
it looks like Amy Wynn just raised her
Oh.
hand.
Lucky you,
Amy, let us have our time to do our work.
What do you got, Amy?
Thanks. The public comment has work to do as well. So thank you. I'm sorry that was really quick. I didn't catch the moment of raising a hand. Amy Wynn, Wynn Coastal Planning and Biology. Really pleased with these revisions, especially the partnering of bringing the SRUs back. That's a big deal. To the deed restriction. We're finding that there's an issue with the timing of the deed restriction. So I'm just wondering if this ordinance has a template or makes clear that the deed restriction does not have to have a building permit application number in it. Because sometimes it's like we have to do those deed restrictions, but we have to get the building permit application number first. That makes it a really awkward timing when somebody wants to get into a certain build season. And then the other one, I just didn't quite understand I didn't understand the owner occupancy part, and I apologize for not getting that. Is the state saying that that owners can't occupy a property that has an ADU, or I totally missed that, and it's okay. I mean, I can do my own reading and answer that if that's not something that can be answered in this round. But thank you very much.
I can answer that last one very quickly. So we'll be looking at this as well from Commissioner Jones's memo, but previously there was the ability to impose an owner occupancy restriction, and we had that included for junior accessory dwelling units only within our code. And I understand, and we'll verify that the state may have removed that requirement entirely.
In fact, the state no longer allows you to require
Yes.
owner occupancy.
Yeah.
Okay, so that means the owner doesn't have to live in either part of either,
Any, doesn't have to live on the property at all.
but it can be long-term rented to multiple, like.
The owner
separate-
can live on the property or not on the property.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. The state doesn't care and is telling all the local jurisdictions, thou shalt not care either.
Okay, good to know.
Great, less to care about. All right. Okay, any other public comment? Well, on Zoom?
No hands raised on Zoom.
Okay. So I'd just like to poll the commissioners. Do we want to continue, the three of us that can stay, and receive any comments from the departing commissioners now? Or do we want to just call it at o'clock and bring it back?
I'm easy. Like, I could go till 2 without lunch, but not much past that. I'll start to get angry. Is that what they call it?
Yeah, I think if we are going to go longer, we'd probably take a break first.
In which case we might. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean,
If you could just speak into your microphone, sorry.
Just to be fair to the other commissioners, maybe it's important enough work that all 5 of us should, because we all share, I think, interesting voice.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And yeah, and even though I was hoping for an all-day meeting because travel, like all of us travel so far, but that's fine.
But we still have time to do something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're moving.
May I suggest definitions?
What I was going to suggest as well.
all right. Definitions?
Can you
Wait.
give us a page? Yeah, which page?
Definitions begin on page 5.
Yes, to the beginning. Okay, so I have just a couple suggestions, and I think Commissioner Babini does as well. I am recalling a recent use permit for Better Place Forest where they redefine themselves as a cremated remains disposer per state law. And I thought we had discussed including that in the new zoning ordinance, in which case we would want to define it according to state law.
Thank you for that question. So that's an amendment that'll come back at a future date, primarily because going through that, it's really a new use type, and so needing to conduct additional CEQA review and compliance based upon that. So I appreciate the comment, and that'll come back at a future date.
Great. Okay, I'm glad there's a plan for that. And then I know a couple more things. Okay. Maybe it's the same type of question. Are we going to be defining short-term rentals, or are we going to bring that forth at a future date?
So that is, thank you for that question too. That is a separate ordinance that is tracking. The Board of Supervisors agreed to defer that item for the department's work plan to the beginning of this fiscal year, which started July 1. And so we still have additional community outreach that we need to conduct as part of that. We've done some, but now we're at the point of really starting to work on some draft regulations and then holding additional workshops for that. So that'll come forward as a separate amendment.
Okay, and
as
we'll
well.
add that definition at that time.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
As it is right now, we're operating under the same,
Full definition.
yes, exactly.
Okay, and then similarly, transient guest. There's a new proposed definition for transient guest on page 20. There's an existing definition for, well, never mind, just transient guest. But transient habitation is not defined, and there's so many types that are already referenced in this ordinance. Might we want to define those at this time?
That's certainly, if the commission would like us to add that. The transient habitation use type is inside the use classifications, and not all use classifications are included in definitions. But if that is a change that the commission would like to see, we certainly can pull over a definition for transient habitation. Really, we added transient guest, which is reflective of the same language that's contained in the coastal zoning regulations to really reflect what are we referring to when we talk about individuals that may be transient guests staying at facilities and for periods of 30 days or less is what's covered underneath there. So if the commission would like to see that, we can add.
I was thinking it might just be helpful for the public because it's something that hot button issue, comes up over and over again, and to have to search for the definition in a deeper location, I think just kind of makes it harder for everybody.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, then one last question. I hope I have a bunch of chicken scratch notes on it. I hope I can formulate it clearly. It's on page 13 at the bottom. There's a new definition for mixed use. In that mixed use definition, bear with me here, it references shared site improvements. The last word on that page is shared, and then you turn it over and it's site improvements. And I was like, okay, what are shared site improvements? So then I went to the development review section 20.085.060, but it doesn't use the language shared site improvements. It uses different language, a different phrase. And so my question is this: might we want to bring the phrasing in alignment? Because since I didn't see shared site improvements show up later on in that section, I wasn't sure what it actually referred to.
Well, this definition, it was what's already in the code. It just was contained in the MU2 zoning district, and we moved it from inside the specific zoning district into the definitions portion. Because it now applies to multiple different mixed-use chapters. Mixed-use general, which was already included in the code, the new North State, and the new Brush Street Triangle. We can review that to see whether or not an alternative phrasing needs to be done to make that clear about what it is applicable to.
Okay, yeah, I think maybe just a review to bring that phrasing into alignment. And that's all I have.
Commissioner Babini?
Yes. Okay. Because this is something that I think is a newer technology and something that we had in our last Planning Commission meeting, I really feel that we need to add a battery energy storage system. And I have language that I would recommend for the definition as well for that. So I do want to add that into the definitions. I would also like to see it be added to the use types on page 32. I would like to see it added to 20.020.80 minor impact utilities, since electrical and gas distribution substations are on that. I would also be okay with adding it to 75, which is the major impact services and utilities, depending on how the commission felt that a battery energy storage system, the impacts were on that, because they are included in different zonings with either permitted or requiring a use permit based on the minor or the major. So I think that's just the feelings of the commission here where they want to add that in. But I do think it should be added as a definition and then into one of those use types, since it should fall into those similar utilities.
But if I may, I would suggest I'll go back to the use permit, because we did classify it previously and I just don't have it at the top of my brain.
No
if it was minor or major impact facilities, I'm guessing it was minor. But we'll come back with that as an addition, because that is how we have classified the use in the past since it came in front of you. And then for the battery energy storage system definition, I would love to hear what your proposed definition would be.
Okay. So battery energy storage system, BESS, is a type of energy storage system that uses batteries to store and distribute energy in the form of electricity. BESS enables energy from renewables, such as solar and wind, to be stored and released when needed to the grid.
And I will ask that you actually email that
I will
over
do
to
that.
us too. Yeah, okay, that would be helpful. Thank you.
The only reason I brought this one up specifically is because, as somebody who looks at these permits a lot, it is very difficult when an applicant wants to do one of these infrastructure projects and can't find it in the code anywhere. And I do think they are kind of a newer technology, and so incorporating it, I think, just may remove some barriers for those folks when they're trying to figure out where and what type of permit they may need in the future.
I love the idea, but I would like us to think more broadly about what it is you're talking about. So it could be battery facilities, it could be windmills, it could be maybe just something like alternative energy facility and storage. and then have a list of things that that could include, because this kind of technology, I think, is just
Definitely, and I guess for the battery energy storage system definition in itself, it's specifically just for storage, and that could be grid generation, renewable energy generation, and I don't think it matters the type. It's just for storage to be stored and then retransmitted back to the grid when it's needed. So I guess we could limit the definition more to just be for storage specific. And I know that to meet 2030 goals, we're looking and needing to have more electrical storage in all jurisdictions.
We'll come back with some proposed revisions.
And then I have one tiny spelling word thing that I don't know why it came up on page 9. Under G in definitions for dwelling single family, it says means a building containing not more than one dwelling unit, included a converted mobile home and movable tiny homes. I think it would be movable tiny home there, since we're talking about one dwelling unit. Since we say one manufactured converted home, I think it would just be home, not homes.
Yes, we can make that change.
Thank you. And that's all for me.
Thank you. Any other definition suggestions from Commissioner Wiedemann or Jones?
I had just a couple thoughts on. So for the on page 20, that transient guest, right? We're putting that in to define it, and are we putting by putting 30 days? We're putting a period where that's part of the definition.
yeah, that's a state
That's
definition.
it. Okay,
Yes.
got it. That's just for clarification. And on H, use permit. And so we're getting rid of the major use permit and the minor use permit definition, and we're lumping it into a use permit. So then when something goes to an admin, the administrator, and they say, oh, this is a use permit issue, you just call it a use permit. Has to be brought to the Planning Commission for a use permit. Let's just go through
Sure.
where these definitions are going.
Sure. So removing just the distinction between minor versus major use permits, really it makes it so if it's subject to a use permit, you're subject to a use permit coming in front of the Planning Commission. Administrative permits are many of the uses that were previously permitted under a minor use permit, which would have gone to the zoning administrator,
Right.
are now moved to an administrative permit that still goes to a public hearing with the zoning administrator and includes the same language as was previously included for minor use permits that allows elevating that administrative permit to the Planning Commission if the zoning administrator deems that that's appropriate. So it could be for controversial types of cases, things like that, that may require a heightened level of review.
So, question about that. Can a neighbor ask for it to be accelerated, or does it have to be up to you?
Oh, I think certainly a neighbor could always ask that during, through either public comment and such. Like, just because a hearing is held at the zoning administrator doesn't mean that that can't be elevated to the Planning Commission as well. If, say, during public comment during that, they decide to elevate it. I'm looking at council and he's looking quizzical. We might have to get back on that.
Because generally the way a minor use permit works is, the neighbors get notified, and if one of them complains about it, or doesn't want it, basically asks for it to be elevated to a use permit, it automatically gets elevated to use permit. It doesn't have to go through hearing with the admin. So you skip a whole hearing process and all of the minutes and noticing that go along with that.
Right. Yeah, that's not currently written into there at this time. That's something that I think we can discuss too and see about provisions for that if that's something that the entirety of the commission would like to see. Generally, how it has been done with minor use permits is that still has been a decision made by the zoning administrator, not by necessarily public comment. And then one key difference from prior the prior code is that now all administrative permits are subject to a public hearing. There is no potential that you could have an administrative permit move forward without the opportunity for neighbors to be heard.
And you still have the same appeal authority
Correct.
process. So if you make a decision and the neighbors don't like it, they appeal
Correct.
it to the planning commission. But at that point, they're paying a fee or
It's,
not?
it's actually appealable to the Board of Supervisors,
Oh,
and
not
yes,
to
there
the
would
plan-
be an appeal fee.
So is that $1,000 or what is your fee?
It's actually more like 2,600, something
So
like
it
that.
goes straight to the Board of Supervisors rather than coming to the planning commission
Correct.
first?
So
And that's primarily because conceptually, an administrative permit could be heard by the planning commission as well.
Right.
And so if the planning commission acted upon that, then the appropriate appeal body would also be the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very different in Fort Bragg. First, your appeal is to the planning commission and then to the city council. And the appeal of the planning commission is free.
Oh, it still costs to appeal to the planning commission for
you guys.
For us as well.
No, for the minor use permit, the appeal to the planning commission is free because you don't actually hold a hearing if it's a minor use permit, if it gets appealed. And so then you still have only one hearing cost. It's just something to think about because it gives, for controversial projects, people who don't have a lot of money, an opportunity to be heard at a higher level if they're concerned. But
that's kind of what I was, thinking too. That's one piece of it is because it's just, somehow like you're on controversial issues, you're bypassing the planning commission in a way.
It actually does not change what is already in the code. It literally it changes the name of what the permit is.
Right, but when something says a major use permit, it comes first to us, and we're getting rid of that.
We're not changing any of that language. A use permit, what was subject to a major use permit, that comes to the planning commission, no matter what.
That's right. But in terms of
yes, so you're just changing the name of something.
You're just
correct.
You're
Which is
consolidating.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
That's what you're
so we can talk about the hearing process when we get to that section.
Right.
So looking at the time.
Yes, thank you.
I think it would be really good to talk about subsequent, if the commission would be continuing this matter to a subsequent hearing. Our suggestion is to the August 1st agenda. It's a week from today. Allows for continuing forward with the discussion without too much time passing, so it's fresh in everyone's brain still.
No, I agree with that. Do we have other items for that meeting?
No, you do not. So this would
Perfect.
be the single item for that meeting. But we would want to see a motion for that.
I move that we move it to August 1st.
I second.
Just a second, Deputy County Counsel.
Sorry, we're moving to continue this public hearing to August 1st.
I move that we continue this public hearing to August 1st.
Second it.
Who are those people anyway?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Rabini,
Yes.
Commissioner Purnell,
Yes.
and Chair Pollen.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Chair Pollen, will you be joining us?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm supposed to be in Marin that day, but I might drive up and back. So, but.
Oh, you're up.
Yep.
Do I have to do we need to make a motion?
We will.
Can we ask you to join by Zoom?
I can't. No.
There, the provisions underneath.
You can't join.
You can't do that. No.
Oh well. I thought you were allowed to do it a few times a year.
Only if you have a.
There's very specific and typically emergency circumstances.
Does childcare count as one of those emergency things? Just wondering.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn today's meeting.
I move we adjourn.
Need a second?
Aye. All right, second that to adjourn.
Okay.
We're all so tired.
I'm sorry, what was that? The other two items, well, we're
Matters.
continuing.
We're continuing.
We're continuing this meeting, so I think, yes. Okay, all in favor of the motion and second?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned.
We got a lot done.